The following is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network.
Yo, what up? This is Rocky Asuka Romero of Chaos, and you are listening to Keepin It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts.
Yo, this is Rich Latta from One Nation Radio. This is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network. We present to you the Ace of Podcasts, Keepin It Strong Style. Let's go. It's the Ace of Podcasts, Keepin It Strong Style. Covering New Japan, they ready to hold it down. Jeremy, Donovan, and the young boy Josh. Come and hit a job out and bury all the frauds. From the Tokyo Dome over to the G1. Social Suplex is the network where we can get it done. I'ma chill and let them have it, cause this is just an intro. Keeping the strong style, 6 stars from the get-go, boy. Yeah, from Tampa Bay to the Tokyo Dome, this is Keeping It Strong Style with your hosts, Jeremy Donovan and the young boy Joshua Smith. And thank you for listening.
Welcome to Keeping It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. Jeremy Donovan here with the young boy Josh Smith. On today's show, we'll discuss the legacy of Antonio Inoki, preview Declaration of Power, and cover all latest news in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling. You can support our show by subscribing and following the Social Suplex Podcast Network or Keeping It Strong Style on the podcast app of your choice and leaving a rating and review. You can also get all the podcasts over at socialsuplex.com. Check out our Pro Wrestling Tee store, prowrestlingtees.com/socialsuplex. That's where you can get your official Keeping It Strong Style t-shirt. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider making a one-time or monthly donation by visiting socialsuplex.com/donate and clicking on the donate button under the Keeping It Strong Style logo. This week's episode is brought to you by the NJPW EXT, the only browser extension for NJPWWorld.com, with features like dark mode, improved translations and layouts, custom and shared playlists, synchronized viewing parties, and much, much more. It takes NJPW World to the next level. You can visit njpwext.us today for details. Young boy, we survived Hurricane Ian.
We did. We survived the hurricane, and we're here this week. And it's a special episode because while we do need to address everything that's going on in New Japan news and reviews and previews and blah, 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 we this past week lost the founder of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Antonio Inoki. And we just recorded our review and retrospective of his life with Mike Sempervive of Wrestling Observer and Justin Knipper from Fight Game Media. And I'm feeling kind of a little bit sad, but also a little bit relieved, because I feel like the audio that the audience is about to listen to is pretty tremendous. And I feel like we couldn't have asked for two better guests to come on and help break down an exhaustive subject like the life of Antonio Inoki, which I think we knew going into this year that he was in bad health, and eventually this was going to happen.
Yeah,
but
2 weeks ago,
I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, we were like, yeah, we're probably going to have to get ready for that. When that footage came out of him at that event with him in the wheelchair, we're like, yeah, we're probably going to have to get ready for this. And then lo and behold, yeah, he unfortunately passed away this past weekend. And of course, there's been tons of tribute shows and videos and articles all over the media world, in and out of wrestling media. And like you mentioned, two great guests for our old friend Mike Sempervive and Justin Knipper from Fight Game Media. We're going to throw to that interview here in a second. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. If you guys are, new to Enoki, you don't really know much about Enoki, obviously you can do podcast series about his whole career in and out of the ring. But we did about an hour and a half kind of, journey all throughout his career, his legacy, some of the scandals that he was involved in. I think it's a great kind of entryway to really learn about who Antonio Inoki was.
If you want a more comprehensive, because this is not a comprehensive history lesson, although there's quite a bit of it in here, but if you'd like that, Justin Knipper and Fumi Saito did a 5-part, about 7 hours worth of audio series over on Fight Game Media. It's called Write This Down. They did this in, I believe, January of this year or November of last year, one or the other. But it's the history of Antonio Inoki, and it's 5 parts. And that's, from what I've been able to see online, probably the most exhaustive resource that's out there. There's also Chris Charlton's book, Lion's Pride, The History of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is also a great resource. And if you're an Observer subscriber, there is the 1996 G1 Retrospective, which serves as almost, now there's some historical inaccuracies, which you don't want to blame Dave too much because, again, it's 1996 and the internet's not what it is today. But so there are some discrepancies, but for the most part, that is one of the better pieces of article that are out there concerning the life of Enoki. And if you ask yourself, well, why is he writing about Enoki in 1996 if he's doing a G1 retrospective? It's because the story of Enoki is the story of New Japan, especially up to that point. And one last thing, we did have a question from Rich that we didn't address on the audio that maybe you and I can talk about here before we kick it over. But I want to give my final thoughts on Enoki just very briefly. I was really sad when I found out that Enoki passed, and it's kind of weird because it's not like I was actively watching Antonio Inoki in his heyday or even alive during his prime. You know, by the time I was born in '88, he was winding down as an active wrestler and was kind of just a star attraction for the next 10 years. And, even though I had a peripheral exposure and knowledge of him via, my brother and via WCW and the magazines, it's not like I really knew Inoki like that. But later in life, as I really started to delve into my New Japan fandom, as like a fan who loves his story, and you look at some of the famous like folk hero names that are out there, like William Muldoon and like I don't know, I'm blanking on names right now, but some of the famous names like Joe Stecker and Luthez and blah blah blah, going down through history. There's all these guys that are very famous, but you can't go and watch them. There's not a lot of tape pre-70s on a lot of these famous historical figures, but Inoki kind of became this folk hero legend for me that I was able to go and watch. And I know for a lot of modern fans, if you go and watch his style and his wrestling matches, it's not something that translates to the modern eye necessarily the same way that 70s Fujinami or like 90s Liger or 80s Tiger Mask does. But something about his innovation and his connection with the crowd has always really resonated for me for some reason. And it was funny. I was talking to Rich of One Nation Radio, and he was like, dude, you've been preparing for this podcast your whole life and you didn't know it. And he's like, since I've known you, you've been talking about Enoki. And I don't feel like I talk about Enoki that much, but I guess I do.
You do.
And like when I read that he died, like I didn't outright cry, but like I shed a couple tears, and I'm not usually that emotional of a person, especially when it comes to pro wrestling like that. But I do think Antonio Inoki is someone that inspired me as a fan, as someone that is a trainee, as someone that's a content creator, and the fact that most of my primary consumption of wrestling revolves around New Japan Pro Wrestling, for better or for worse, whatever his relationship was with them towards the end, he was the father of this and he was the innovator of this. And, you can really trace a lot of his influence through Ricky Choshu and through the shoot style guys and through Fujinami, through Tiger Mask. Like there's probably no trainee that he had that's more influenced by Enoki than Sayama, which is interesting because a lot of people would look at Sayama and think he's like Enoki, but Enoki was this innovator in his day that was doing things that were totally different than everyone else. Well, that was Ricky Choshu and that was Sayama. And where do you think that they got that idea to change the philosophy and the psychology of their work and innovate it and push it to the forefront? They got it from Enoki. And a lot of modern fans, they talk about Baba and they talk about the King's Road, but they don't understand how influential Inoki really was and how a lot of the shit that they love really was genesis and birth from him. And so I am very sad that he's passed, and I am sad that the full reconciliation between him and New Japan didn't take place. Although there were signs, for better or for worse, this past year that it looked like they were on that road to reconciliation. But our thoughts and prayers are with his friends and his family, and I just want to thank him for everything that he did and gave to us.
Yeah, without Inoki, there is no New Japan Pro Wrestling, and there might not be a Keeping It Strong Style. So we definitely have to, give thanks for that and celebrate his legacy, the good and the bad. So right now we will throw to our discussion with Mike and Justin, and then we'll be back in a second. Thank you for listening to Keeping It Strong Style. Jeremy Donovan here with the young boy Josh Smith, and we are joined by two special guests to discuss Antonio Inoki. So we are joined by Justin M. Kipner from Fight Game Media and Mike Sempervive from Wrestling Observer Live. And like I said, we're going to be talking about Antonio Inoki, founder of New Japan Pro Wrestling, also one of the biggest stars in the history of Japan. He passed away this past Saturday. Yahoo News confirmed him passing away on Saturday morning, age 79. We know that Inoki's been battling health issues in the recent years. We've seen him confined to a wheelchair. I believe it was heart troubles, kind of related to what the main health issue is and what caused his passing. And we know that we could possibly do a whole episode or whole series of episodes on the career of Inoki in wrestling, just his life out of wrestling, in politics, and just everything that he's been involved in, how his effect is affected in pop culture all over the world. But we're going to try to kind of give a comprehensive kind of overview of Inoki, try to hit some different areas here. I'm talking about Inoki's, legacy and what he meant to us and to New Japan Pro Wrestling, just I guess the wrestling industry in general. So guys, I guess first of all, let's talk about what made Inoki so special to you guys.
Justin, I don't know if you want to go ahead and go first.
I was actually muted. Sorry.
Oh.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yes, Inoki is special. Inoki is special because, a couple of different reasons, like his charisma, of course. He had natural athletic ability, even from a young age, that helped him create this Antonio Inoki character that not only everyone believed in, but he really believed in it. I think he believed in it the most. I think no one at times felt as believable as Inoki, and I think that's one of the themes that really made him stand out. I mean, his path was based on trying to be number one in Japan, trying to beat Baba, and the way to do that was to take all Japan's more traditional, orthodox NWA style pro wrestling and do something more real, more believable. And I think that what made him special is that he committed so hard to this theory or concept of realism, because you can't just say it's real or it's not. There's a lot of gray. He introduced a lot of gray into the industry. And also, he had the first MMA match, arguably. There's that part of it too. That's why he's special. He's a special part of Japanese culture too, Japanese pop culture, especially from the Showa period till now. I could keep going on, but I want to hear what Mike has to say about this as well.
Well, no greater self-promoter than Antonio Inoki. And, with Don King, Bob Arum, Vince McMahon all still alive, losing Antonio Inoki, what you lose in him not only is a great promoter, but as Justin was saying, he believed what he was, and he worked very hard to be the best Antonio Inoki that he could be. And he had to grow up in the shadow of Baba, and he wasn't that handpicked guy. He was one of the guys,
Right.
but he wasn't the guy. And he worked really hard to get himself out of that shadow and to make something that was his. He was the original ungovernable. He wanted to be his own champion. He wanted to tour the world. He wanted to be the guy and the power, and he turned himself into that by just what Justin mentioned about doing a different style of pro wrestling that was not based on what Bobby Bruns brought over and Rikidozan started. He wanted it to be a martial art, and he went about basically putting himself on display. He was New Japan Pro Wrestling. He was the Lion that would go out and go into different jungles and conquer all of them with the mindset of pro wrestling be strongest. We are the strongest mixed martial art. And he had an unbelievable career, and all of the ways that it spider webs out and touches so many other different facets of life, whether it be politics and all of the things that go into that, whether it be business ventures, many failed, many with money that was
not his.
That was not his at all.
Absolutely. And just like a great promoter, he was amazing at spending other people's money for them and trying to make it work. So it is a complicated, complex, and pretty amazing legacy of someone that it's going to be really difficult for anyone to ever do what he was able to do in Japan, coming in, in the world of pro wrestling, in the realm of pro wrestling. It's almost impossible to do it nowadays.
And
Yeah.
Mike, you mentioned Don King a moment ago, and that made me think about I think the best way to think of Inoki, if you're not familiar with him, is imagine a Don King or a Vince McMahon type promoter combined with a wrestler like Hulk Hogan, who had the fan support, charisma, credibility, and longevity, and put those into the same person and one guy. I really can't say that one person had that much, was it not influence, but also just, I mean, he was truly the total package for the wrestling industry, not just in Japan, but for the world.
No, and transcended that. In Japan, absolutely transcended that, where you look at Santo in Mexico, and I'm not an expert on Lucha Libre, but he's otherworldly, and that's
Right.
basically what Enoki is, in some aspects. In Japan, he really is, with having the real ability to shoot. He had the real ability to back it up. So, yes, he had Hogan's stardom to a certain degree, but then you attach his ability to actually wrestle with that and to actually pull off double wrist locks on, boxers who may have wanted to get too spicy or whatever it may be. You know what I mean? So it's like he actually, you have to take a handful of people and mush them together to even try to come up with what Enoki is. He's very difficult to draw one-to-one to.
Yeah, that's kind of been the thing, is as Enoki's passed, and I've been thinking more and more about what is a comparable comparison. And the reality is, like you guys mentioned, there really isn't a one for one. I mean, in terms of like influence as a promoter and booker, I mean, obviously you guys drew the parallel of Baba and how he sort of always was an eternal rival of his and started off in his shadow and that sort of thing. But like in the West, the closest thing we have is Vince, but Vince didn't promote himself the way Vern did, but Enoki did, and he was successful with that. Where when he initially started off, he didn't have the Machine backing him. He didn't have the NWA ties. He didn't have even TV to start off the way that Baba did, and yet still he was still this kind of like punk rock outlaw group that found a way to pull the scraps together and to get Carl Gotch in and to get guys from different places around the world so that they could try and go up against what was kind of a monster, and initially, and then eventually became like their rivals for several decades. And it was all through self-belief, and it's the thing is, watching if you go back and you watch his matches, it's not just self-belief, but he was able to translate that to belief from the crowd, that believability that you guys mentioned, where I can think of very few people in my lifetime looking at tape. I mean, Hulk Hogan, Carlos Colon, there's very few where maybe Bob Backlund, they get the same kind of reactions from the crowds through their performances. And that lasted with him his whole career pretty much. I mean, even when he went into, semi-retirement, even those big Tokyo Dome shows, like the response to an old broken down Enoki is still unbelievable. And then, post, retirement at the Bombay shows, like he was truly, truly a transcendent star. And I mean, who else can we think of that was a promoter and a wrestling star and a politician and a businessman and yada, yada, yada. Like it's truly remarkable.
Yeah, I feel you definitely have to combine some people, like you guys are saying. You got to combine a Hulk Hogan, a Vince McMahon, The Rock, a Arnold Schwarzenegger, like all these kind of different like personalities and people who kind of spread themselves. I think that really kind of all comes together for Antonio Inoki. And we talk about what makes him special, and like he just had that magnetic charisma about him. You look back and you watch some of his matches, a lot of them now up on New Japan World for free, and you just see the way the crowd is reacting to him. Oftentimes it kind of feels like maybe he's like a cult leader. He's just has this whole crowd is just like ravenous and just really into his matches, and the huge responses and reactions he got was just incredible.
And how did Pusha T say? Didn't reinvent the wheel, just a better design. And that's kind of what he did. Those crowd responses came from the fact that Japan wanted a hero. And that's what originally what wrestling brought to them was the ability to fight the war again by defeating all of these outsiders that come through, and we have our heroes and we can defeat these people. And with wrestling still being kayfabe, a lot of people just didn't know any better. And the expansion of TV and people falling out with heart attacks that Blassie caused because he was biting somebody, and that, kept going through Enoki. And what he did was, instead of you come to us, I'm going to take the fight to you no matter where I have to go. And no matter what the style is. Yes, this is pro wrestling, but now I'm taking pro wrestling out and I'm going to individually pick off people, whether that be Roland Bach or this person or that person or Willie Williams, or again, no matter who you want to choose out of his fighting history. That's why he was able to maintain that legacy and get those cheers and be that hero. And that's why it's impossible now to replace him, because that led to mixed martial arts. It helped to lead to mixed martial arts. And now we know exactly, look, you saw UFC 1, you knew, and if you'd ever been in a fight in your life, you knew what a kickboxer was going to do to a sumo with no lateral movement. You know what I mean? But so now that we know all of that, how do you try to become that type of Enoki figure? Again, it was what a right place, right time. And again, amazing. He was able to get the responses he did, and he was able to ingratiate himself and endear himself to the Japanese people by defending their honor, by being, again, a worked shoot fighter.
Yeah. And it's interesting that he became such this huge megastar. If you just think from his origins and it's the beginning of his career, 17-year-old, found in Brazil by Ricky Dozan, and then goes to Ricky Dozan's JWA and kind of becomes his disciple, kind of the guy that Ricky Dozan was kind of bringing up for JWA.
Yeah, I think the story and really understanding Enoki from this point, Jeremy, that you brought up from Ricky Dozan kind of picking him up in Brazil. He was like a track and field shot put star, just like Okada was. He was 17. He had stuff going for him already. But the big difference between Ricky Dozan's pupil Enoki and Ricky Dozan's pupil Giant Baba, he didn't have to make the same struggles Enoki did. He didn't have to travel on a boat from Japan to Brazil with like 11 of his family members and work on a coffee field. Baba was a giant guy, and he didn't even have to go to college because he became a pitcher for the Yomiuri Giants. He was kind of a star athlete from the beginning. He was a spectacle in a lot of ways, and some in Japan don't like when somebody just kind of fathered into the business and put right on top, even though Giant Baba is the giant and he was promoted before Enoki was a big star. Baba was the star under Ricky Dozan. So
Mhm.
I think that that what's the word? That fieriness or that sour grapes feeling that Inoki seemed to have felt for a long time, especially early on, uh, based on his training. Baba didn't train with Karl Gotch. Baba didn't have the same kind of train. He was trained by NWA world champions. And
Yeah.
the way when you look at New Japan and All Japan, especially back then, you can imagine, especially from the Japanese fan perspective, think about All Japan at that time as almost like a FIFA, or like it's Japan's offering of the best pro wrestling in the world at the time. So you're getting Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe. You're getting the best of the best, and you're kind of opening Japan up to the rest of the world. You're getting on the world stage. Whereas New Japan they were forced to create their own path, create their own NWA world title with the IWGP idea. And this also, not only was the style of wrestling different, I mean, that was a big part of it too. All Japan, like I said, it was kind of, if you watch back, you're watching traditional, quote unquote, perfect NWA style matches. Whereas if you watch Inoki's, what would they were called, not mixed martial arts matches. They had like a mixed style match. There was a term for it back then.
Style.
Different style matches. Yeah. What he was trying to do was he was trying to, again, insert some kind of realism or something that you would never see in All Japan. And I think it's also where he started introducing general martial arts into pro wrestling, and that injected a special authentic Japaneseness to the wrestling, which All Japan of course had to an extent, but overall it was a worldwide pro wrestling offering, whereas New Japan was quote unquote strong style. Now, there's no real thing as strong style. It was Inoki's way to market against Baba. It was him trying to say without saying, this is real, even though it's not necessarily real, but that's the difference. And he took that, all the way.
Thank God for Karl Gotch.
Right?
Being the real key of that, and being able to, really be the thing that helped establish Enoki, and him being a real world champion in Japan, and then coming over, and obviously he bought the NWF belt and everything happened the way that it happened with Backlund and all that sort of stuff. But even though Enoki obviously wanted to have those trinkets because, it was important to be recognized by somebody as a world champion, it's all that training that he did with Karl Gotch, and it's how that training ended up going on and being worked. There was no Amarillo for guys in New Japan to go to, so they had to go to other places because the traditional pipelines of the NWA they weren't able to go with. And that, again, that draws, Inoki didn't have to go to Tennessee, or he had to go to Tennessee. He had to go to Buffalo. He had to go to Kansas City and places like that. Whereas, Baba didn't necessarily, he really didn't have to do that. When he came over, he was basically pushed as a star right off the bat and didn't have to do some of the same things that other people did. And I'm sure that was another driving force behind Enoki as well, too. It's the Muda and Chono thing. Muda ended up he went to Dallas. He went to Florida with Eddie Graham and Hiro Matsuda. He ends up in Charlotte. Meanwhile, Chono's in, work in the Maritimes. He's in the death period of Central States and Kansas City and places like that. And Vancouver, places like that, where it changes your outlook and it changes, again, you don't want to be in those positions for too long. And Enoki did what he had to do and grinded through it. But, I'm sure that also, played a part in his, drive to want to be better and excel and always trying to come from underneath to prove something, because that's what his whole career was about, was just proving something.
About fighting. Yeah, he's defined by the idea of fighting.
Yeah.
Whereas Baba he was the king. He was kind of, it's almost like he was born into it. So the dynamic of, gentle king giant versus wily not underling peer. I mean, it's about credit and merit versus being placed in a position. This happened with Jumbo Tsuruta too later on. Jumbo was he was an Olympic wrestler. He was put in a position because he had kind of earned, I don't want to say earned it, but he was there because of his athletic background. And fans interpreted that all different kinds of ways.
Yeah. I mean, definitely what you guys said. There's the distinct, differentiation between these two, figureheads and their brands of pro wrestling and the legacies that they left behind. And because of their tag team and because they both debuted on the same day and they both stopped wrestling in 1998, they ran and, were both promoters and started their companies in the same year. There's this eternal rivalry between the two of them. And I mean, Baba didn't even live in the dojo when he first broke into the business. He was already, like you mentioned, a star. He almost kind of got, and more to a greater extent, but a similar booking to the way like young Shinsuke did as like a golden rookie or something comparable to like modern Kurt Angle. He came in with the accolades and everything like that. And he's wrestling world champions and working main events across the country, within 1 to 2 years of breaking into the business. And he's already on excursion. And Inoki is, kind of treated like the more traditional young boy where he's, staying on the undercard for a long time. And by the time that both of them are, main eventing in JWA at the same time, he is a peer, but he's just slightly underneath Baba. They had the famous tag team together from 68 to or maybe 67 to 71.
Yep. BI Platoon.
Right. And
Baba Enoki Platoon. And I think that's where he got that number 2 feeling from a lot as well, because they were a huge super team at the time under Rikidozan.
Right. But he's always the face in peril. He's always, I mean, they didn't lose very often, but if they did, it's going to be Inoki taking the pin. And Baba's the top guy. He's the guy that gets the hot tag and comes in and saves the day. And he's the big star. And when they break off, who's the one that gets the NWA, recognition? Who's the one that gets the Nippon TV deal? It's all Baba. He's the one that has the machine behind him from day one, going all the way back to, their inception in the business. And Inoki's the guy that had to really strive and bet on himself time and time again. Even when he was supposed to come back from excursion, he went and formed Tokyo Pro. What was that, 66? And
the original, with
1966.
Yeah, and that didn't work out for him, but in the long run, that probably was beneficial, because when he came back, that started him being somewhat pushed as a main event commodity in JWA. But all along, like you mentioned, it always was Baba, the king, who was trained by all these NWA champions. And then you've got Inoki, who's trained in the Lancashire style under Karl Gotch, who has to scrap and crawl and fight his way to the top. And they're just two totally different paths. And it really formed their legacy and their philosophies as bookers and wrestlers and promoters.
Yeah. With 2020 hindsight, how it was all in those cards written way back when he formed Tokyo Pro, to be honest. I mean, him being a rebel, and having rebel spirit, him wanting to break out, him looking at that and then having to go back, tail between the legs before he's finally forced out of there again. And, Baba leaves and forms All Japan. He leaves and forms New Japan, is working from underneath in that. But still, I mean, how could it have gone any other way? It was just in the cards for that. And as you guys
almost like destiny.
About, yeah. And how we've talked about here, how again, there was the one gilded guy, and then there was the, again, the warrior, out there in the, cold in the fight, and Baba inside. And yeah, I mean, it really does typify and really prove what those guys are and how we look back at their legacies. I mean, that's pretty much what they are. And Inoki, I don't think Inoki gets enough credit as far as, becoming a Muslim and having that impact that's able to have. Look, Muhammad Ali is the most famous person, I think, to walk the face of the earth, at least in my lifetime. And Muhammad Ali could walk anywhere and be safe. Be quote unquote safe almost anywhere. He could walk into Pakistan Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and be fine. He can walk around, obviously, North America, wherever he wanted to go and be fine because he was Muhammad Ali. Antonio Inoki didn't necessarily have it to that level, but you were able to see what he was able to do. And look, the whole thing with Iraq and the kids as human shields, and were those people going to be released anyway? And opens up a whole new can of worms when it comes to Enoki and his politics. But it took a set of balls to go do that, knowing you were going to be censured by your government, knowing that this was going to be bucking and doing, he was able to go in there the same way he was able to talk and go into Pakistan because of the fight that he had with Pelwan and all that. Talk to people in Afghanistan, even if it was only at the most, press and the most, topical, the easiest level to, cut through. Sorry, it's been a long day here, but, even if it was just for press reasons and promotional reasons, he still had the ability to do that. And that's probably something that won't be talked about too much, but I think that actually matters, and I think it matters somewhat with how he's viewed by a significant portion of the world that we don't really bring up or talk about when it comes to professional wrestling at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just talking about, his impact in that community and just worldwide, that kind of global appeal that he had. And you see that by all the different media outlets across the world that have been, reporting and, covering his life and death. And, we talk a lot about him betting on himself and, leaving JWA, starting New Japan Pro Wrestling in 1972 and kind of betting on himself to start this new promotion, kind of built around him, built on his back, which kind of led into this really hot era of wrestling in Japan, and especially during this kind of prime era of Enoki from 72 to 88. And we kind of saw his kind of booking style unfold during that period where, maybe to, more modern fans, you could compare it to kind of like the Hulk Hogan model, where you're bringing in these big monsters to come into a territory, and you have to have this hero that's going to take the monsters down. We see guys like Vader and Bam Bam Bigelow and Stan Hansen and Andre the Giant, and just all these just massive foreign talents kind of coming in and being, the main kind of main enemy to Enoki, and him having to, vanquish all these kind of evil foreign monsters and be this hero that Japan wanted. So just kind of curious, what are your guys' thoughts on some of the key guys that Enoki faced during that kind of prime era from 72 to 88?
No, Jeremy, I'm happy that you brought up Hulk Hogan, because I think understanding Enoki, especially at the time we're talking about now, right when New Japan got started, he had to build programs for himself. Now, what you explained about the Hulk Hogan, the booking style, where basically Hogan was crushing monsters until Warrior, and then, it got a little different. But generally, Hogan was going to slay the dragon every month. I believe that this whole template was absorbed by what Enoki was doing, because what All Japan had going on, they had that what they were offering the best of the best in the world to the Japanese audience. If you want to learn about and watch pro wrestling, you're going to get the best stars from all over. You're going to get Giant Baba, but you're also going to get the NWA World Champion. You're going to have Bruiser Brody, Hansen, and such. New Japan had to create their own mythos, and they needed a star. It was Enoki, and he needed a rogues gallery. And it started with the different style matches where he would slay these beasts from outside of pro wrestling, like judo and kickboxing. He had a fight with Chuck Wepner, and he had matches with Andre the Giant. It was kind of, anything goes. It was almost like Ultraman, right? He was the hero. Clearly, he was the main character in the New Japan story. And I think that whole concept is how Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania got started. Honestly, I think Hulkamania got started in Japan with Enoki. I mean, I think Hogan was really a massive star. He was teaming with Enoki at a time. There was even talk of him going to All Japan. He was so hot. Terry Funk wanted him to, come over. There was a lot of Brody jumped to New Japan in '85, and Stan on the second time he went to All Japan. So there was a lot of tension in the air. It was very competitive. Hogan chose to stay with New Japan and learned how to become a superstar from Antonio Inoki, even down to hulking up. I think when you think of hulking up, I think that's Inoki's. I think Inoki invented the hulking up when he's taking lots of
fire up
strikes. He's firing up. He's saying, "Come on, come on." He's with his two hands. He always does this, especially in the more monstrous battles like he had with Stan Hansen and Andre the Giant and Strong Kobayashi, the very bloody one with Strong Kobayashi and Rusher Kimura and Hiro Matsuda. I mean, every month it seemed like he was taking out a monster, which helped people believe.
Yeah,
And
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think the whole thing with Hogan, I think part of it's Inoki. I think it's also mixed in a little bit with the Jerry Lawler stuff that he saw in Memphis in his early Genesis.
Sure.
But there's no
and Superstar
denying.
Graham and of course
Yeah.
All of his own influences and Dusty. But I think that Hulkamania, that friction, I think it really, there was a spark in Japan that carried over into WWF.
There's no denying that, like, his early formation, working and headlining and tagging with Inoki was crucial to Hulk Hogan. And obviously, that could be a whole podcast in and of its own self. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think as far as this whole period with Inoki and the way that they modeled their business around him, I mean, the closest thing that we've seen to in modern times, if you really think about it, especially in the West, how many guys have been at the tip top of a run for as long as Inoki was? I mean, the most comparable thing we could probably point to is maybe John Cena, and I don't think John Cena ever was from a sustained perception, the main event, the top guy for the
Maybe
whole
the Sheik?
15 years. Yeah, maybe the Sheik.
Bobo. I mean, that's a different setting, and it's a little before Inoki, but I mean,
Right.
God, how do you do 12,000 a week
Bruno
for years? Bruno as well, yeah.
But there's very few people that a major national company like that have been centered around, that has stayed hot throughout the long prolonged life of his run. And that's kind of what Inoki was. And I mean, I've watched a lot of that stuff from that period. And I mean, a lot of it's the mixed style fights, the different style fights, but it's also him bringing in, respected outsiders like Jack Briscoe and Billy Robinson and, obviously like the shooters like Willem Ruska and the shoot fight with Ali. And then later on, he had the prolonged feuds with like Brody and, the IWE guys and then UWF and so on and so forth. And they kind of just always found a way to keep the company, centered around Inoki. The story of New Japan is the story of Inoki. And I mean, even in like '83, when they had the embezzlement scandal, and it looked like he was going to be ousted from Power and he was going to have to leave New Japan, TV Asahi basically told New Japan, like, if he's gone, they pulled a Brock Lesnar. They said, if he's gone, we're gone. And they had to keep him on. And, so there's always that criticism, like he didn't put over Fujinami and Maeda and Choshu enough. And there's probably some truth to that. But he was still the top star to such an extent that they kind of couldn't afford to not have him on top, for better or for worse.
And that's very empowering. That's a very empowering thing to have happen too. And, it can get you to continue to do things that may not necessarily be the right thing to do. But
Right.
hey, you figure you got a little bit of fallback. And unfortunately, that ended up being the case kind of up until the end, when it came to him trying to push an Inokiism and him selling the company to Ukes because other people were trying to take it over. Well, no, they were trying to take it over because it's not making any money. It's about to go bankrupt, and you've kind of helped run it into the ground. And unfortunately, that's the way that it went. But it lasted for a long time, not only because of all these mixed styles that we're talking about, but because of, matches against Tiger Jeet Singh. That was a very important one for him. That was his wild feud that he had in between all of these mixed martial arts affairs. We were having just the psychopath wanting to come over with a saber in his mouth and he wants to kill you. Forget about judo. This guy's got a saber. And so, the feud against Tiger Jeet Singh, he was able to garner so much positive press because of the affiliation with the WWF, WWF at the time, because he was able to get Superstar Graham and Bob Backlund and Dusty Rhodes and Stan Hansen and guys like this as part of those MSG tours and all that, which again, with all of the magazines being based out of New York, they were very partial to showing a lot of that stuff. And Antonio Inoki had, again, not only because of Ali, when you obviously look past Ali, when you just looked at the wrestling magazines and things like that, he was able to get great attention. I mean, look, some of the secondary magazines that aren't as popular, when you look back at the 70s, a lot of them covered Pedro Martinez heavily and covered Johnny Powers. And you see a lot of Ernie Ladd stuff from that time, Ox Baker and Antonio Inoki being one of those guys who, of course, obviously usurped that belt, took it, and then became it became several things. I know it was the NWF belt for a while. I think he merged it as a part of his WWF mixed martial arts title, or the Great 18 title, or whatever it was called. But, so, it was also sometimes you forget about what you can consider more pro wrestling type of things. Obviously Masa Saito, the island match is a great example of the fight really being, pro wrestling snow globe being all shaken up. So, kind of what's been forgotten about with all this great talk about Enoki is just some of the pro wrestling stuff, including right down to like Hulk Hogan, making Hulk Hogan for years. We saw the pictures of Hulk Hogan, especially because the WWF ended up, kicking out a lot of other photographers, but the kanji symbol on his trunks and him standing there with the trophy and the flowers after he won the IWGP tournament and that whole thing. Look, Inoki's dead. We can never trust a thing that comes out of Hogan's mouth. Was Inoki really knocked out? I would say no, but who knows anymore?
Nobody knows.
That's another great piece of this whole, wrestling lore that Inoki leaves.
And
they brought an ambulance to the venue that night too at the 83. It was in the newspapers, like Hogan just somehow destroyed Inoki, and at the time, like we were talking earlier, he often wouldn't lose. So when he lost, it really did make waves.
Yeah, and of course, the whole infamous promo of Hogan, calling the WWF title a toy and a trinket, and the IWGP title, it's the real title, the real prize that he's going after.
Yeah, he's probably upset that the internet exists now. But about I wanted to touch quickly on the embezzlement situation that happened. It was like 82, 83, 84-ish. So this isn't completely confirmed, but the story that I've read about and been told is that the whole UWF idea was kind of this exit strategy by Inoki and Hisashi Shinma, who was like the kayfabe president of WWF at the time, and he was the financial big head honcho over at New Japan at the time. To avoid this situation and avoid any legal trouble, UWF was going to form and be introduced within New Japan and become its own company. Although it says a little bit about Inoki's character too. Inoki did a double swerve and stayed with New Japan, and Shinma went on to form UWF with Satoru Sayama, and that it led its own path. But you can see, like, when we talk about Inoki as a businessman, a promoter, and you want to compare him with Giant Baba, that is where they differ very much. And I would say that Baba had a lot more total success as a promoter than Inoki. And we should probably talk about some of Inoki's mishaps, bloopers, I guess, almost running New Japan into the ground completely. And a lot of fans also believed he turned his back on pro wrestling in the late 90s. So, I mean, it's not all peaches and cream. He's a complex guy.
It's a very complex subject. And I mean, the thing with Inoki is, like, a lot of the things that brought him, just like Vince McMahon, a lot of the things that brought him success early on in his career were the same things that he was trying to do later on that resulted in failure and disgrace and ultimately were a detriment to the business. And some of that was the alignment with the shoot style stuff and the MMA and the pushing of those guys, and obviously the Enokiism. And it's a double-edged sword because he is sort of the godfather of MMA. If you look at the genesis of UWF and PWFG and Shuto and Pancrase and Pride and Rings and all these different companies, they're all led by Inoki disciples. They all have a direct tie to his, philosophies and style of booking. But at the same time, they were the same things that he thought. I don't think Inoki thought that he was turning his back on wrestling. He thought that wrestling was evolving and was trying to stay true to his philosophy. But ultimately, it was to the detriment of New Japan. But like I mentioned before, I see New Japan as being the story of Inoki up to a certain point. And I think for Inoki, that was always the case. He saw himself as being bigger than the brand itself. And that whole thing with the UWF, I mean, I've heard two stories about it. I've heard that there was an attempt on his part to potentially have two revenue streams from TV Fuji and TV Asahi and create the illusion that there was two different brands while he was secretly getting the money from both of them. I've also heard that it was an exit strategy because he was going to be ousted from the company. And the reality is no one seems to know the truth behind all of this. I've heard differing accounts from very credible sources. And it's kind of one of those things. It's the legacy of Inoki. But if you look at his track record, his history, you look at IGF and UFO, he's done things like this later on as well that kind of align with some of the reports. And maybe there's a little bit of truth in both of them.
Yeah,
but,
little column A, little column B. I mean, look at that concept was not foreign to him, considering that Baba and Enoki were stars on two different TV channels working for the same company. For all intents and purposes, that's exactly how they became bigger stars. And with Enoki, back to the businessman thing, yeah, Baba was a much better businessman because Baba was running a professional wrestling promotion. He was in the pro wrestling business. Enoki was in the Enoki business. And it's how you looked at your products. He was the lightning rod. He was the North Pole that everything circled around. So Enoki isn't be strong as this is what we're selling here, folks. This is what we're doing. Whereas Baba, more along the lines of a more natural pro wrestling promoter who did push himself further down the card, knew when it was over, delegated in different ways, used his wife as a buffer, all of the intelligent things. I mean, I don't think there's any question when it came to quote unquote running a pro wrestling promotion. Absolutely. To me, Baba did it much, much better.
Yeah.
With that said, obviously
Baba was like a Japanese version of like a Sam Muchnick. He took that old school style and a lot of integrity he had. I mean, that was a big part of what defined his booking style. And like Mike said, he did it the right way and he took himself out of the main event picture. He slowly phased himself out. And he didn't mind being in a fun opener with a 6-man opener in the 90s. He had a different idea of what pro wrestling should be. I think it's more like not what wrestling is or isn't, it's someone's idea of what it should be versus someone else's. And they obviously had two very different ideas.
And when you back to a little bit of what you said earlier on too about, I think Enoki thought pro wrestling turned its back on him because in his, I mean, you got to be a little bit of a sociopath. And I think to him, these guys are weak now and they do really need to be spirit slapped. Like, what the hell happened here? Like, I'm a wrestler. I could have taken Mirko. Like, whoa, hold on now. A lot of, and yeah, he may have lost one of the Pelwan fight, whatever, but like that, to him, I think in his mind, like wrestling, again, like you see with all of us can bring up an older wrestler or personality today that believes that pro wrestling has turned its back on them as opposed to the business evolving and things moving forward and progressing, whether you like it or not. So I think it really with Enoki, I mean, up until the day that he died, I mean, obviously straight through 2005, through the mess with New Japan and the IGF and the split of the IWGP ties, all that stuff, like Like he really thought, to me, that wrestling turned its back on him, and that's what it was never supposed to be. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, and I mean, even as a promoter and a booker, looking at the difference between him and Baba, like you guys mentioned, Baba ran it more old school. Very often, if you look at in 2022, we've seen like rundown sheets of how the wrestlers were supposed to behave. Like Baba had a reputation for concealing and stopping any sort of scandal from coming out, whereas like Enoki himself was very often the actual source of the scandals
Yeah.
in his company. And it was two totally different philosophies and ways of like running the business. Even as like recent as a month ago, they put out the press release that IGF was coming back. Unfortunately, nobody knows if that's going to happen now. But like, this is a guy who like had enough belief to think like, I'm still going to do MMA, I'm still going to do wrestling, and he was like really in bad health, obviously, and he still had more that he wanted to do in the industry. So I definitely think like the difference in their booking philosophies is like you guys mentioned. Baba was running wrestling and Enoki was doing Enoki. Like that was his like X factor. And you look at the difference between like how he maneuvered Choshu and Fujinami versus the way that like Baba maneuvered Jumbo and Tenru, and then like the four pillars. Totally different things altogether.
Yeah, and with Inoki kind of focus on kind of Enoki and this strong style that we've been talking about, and this kind of this need to make New Japan and wrestlers presented on the same level as these MMA fighters, that kind of births into what modern fans call Enokiism, and we're getting an influx of these MMA fighters into New Japan. Of course, Enoki he finishes off his final countdown retirement tour, which lasted from like 94 to 98. His last match was against Don Fry, big MMA fighter during that time. And then from there, we're seeing him continue to kind of bring in these MMA stars as MMA is kind of exploding worldwide in Japanese. And Enoki is seeing that and really wants to, again, kind of evolve with that and kind of show that his wrestlers can kind of hang with these MMA fighters. And that's what we're bringing in these guys and having these kind of work shoot fights and all this kind of controversy happening with this Enokiism style.
Also, we got to factor in when all this stuff was happening, and I guess we're talking like mid to late 90s into like early 2000s, the whole idea, like the word or concept MMA wasn't really even coined until like late 90s. And all of us, I don't know how old you guys are, but I remember in general, no one really knew what a fight should look like just yet. We kind of did, but we're all MMA literate now, UFC literate. We know what things are supposed to look like. We know how matches end and start. Back then, there was still that sense of, well, Inoki did the real training and he went through Carl Gotch's real catch system. And hypothetically, guys like Yuji Nagata should, in theory, be able to beat anybody like Fedor or Crow Cop. Looking back, that's very, very silly thinking. But we didn't know at the time. And especially we didn't know Crow Cop or Fedor would become who they were too. So it also has to, looking back like in 2022 and watching Enoki and watching not just him throughout his career, but that era of not just New Japan, but also like Pride was pro wrestling at the time. That was what was drawing. And K1 was as popular, probably more popular at the time. I mean, the mainstream fan base did shift a bit somehow, and Enoki sided with that side of Japanese pro wrestling, whereas then we get into the dark ages of wrestling where companies like All Japan and New Japan Pro Wrestling Noah started, but they didn't have, it wasn't like the 90s. It was a different period. And if you didn't have that quote Enokiism involved in your wrestling style, it was kind of looked at as like passe. It's kind of like glam metal in the 90s. People were too afraid to like it because grunge was so popular. It had to kind of make a comeback later. But that's what it seemed like the feeling. And he really had this, the realism obsession. I mean, I think he might have hurt some careers with that too.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
he did. Yeah. And look, boxing was always the martial art here in America. It's the one thing that we were able to understand. Wrestling to a little bit of a different degree, amateur wrestling, but it was boxing. For a short time, it was karate. For a short time, it was this or that. But we knew boxing. Whereas in Japan, there was sumo, there was judo, there was karate, there was a opening of different styles. And, you know, obviously, they were more apt as a culture and a mainstream to take to that, and they did. And Japanese wrestling couldn't keep up. And K1 was for sure more popular than what anything that pro wrestling was doing. I mean, remember Enoki coming into that Dynamite Stadium, the K1 Pride show together, and he's parachuting in front of 90,000 people and all that stuff. And Justin's right. In their mind at the time, they thought Nagata could take Crow Cop. They thought Yasuda could take LeBanner. And I still don't believe for a second that LeBanner Yasuda fight was legit, but let's say that it was, okay?
It was legit, Mike. You don't know.
I know. But let's say that it was. I mean, that's exactly what they thought was going to happen with Nagata. Crow Cop is, he looks good, but he's a little blown up, and he's a one-dimensional kickboxer. Well, we didn't realize he could throw from any angle, but that should have been the wake-up call right there. And it was, look, Yuji Nagata's career, because of how probably people like me that were big fans of him, that kept his flame, going for so long, and his longevity, and the fact that he was a great pro wrestler. I mean, he was Mr. Dead Stock. He was dead in the water. And it was looking like Shinsuke Nakamura could end up having the same type of career of being a guy that was dead in the water and having a career that didn't even start before the damn thing ended. And that, unfortunately, is what a lot of people are going to talk about, because it's, the thing that's the closest to them. But what Justin's saying is absolute facts in that, they should have done better matchmaking and known better, especially in hindsight. But we have the benefit of hindsight. And no one knew that Mariko was going to be as deceptive as he was, and as much of a wrestler killer as he was up until the time he fought Randleman.
Yeah, it's going to age me a little bit, but when I was young, I remember reading your article, Mike, scathing review of, Enokiism at the time, and him booking Shinsuke to have an MMA fight just days before he's supposed to have the unification fight in the Dome and everything like that. So it's kind of funny.
I just found that article again, and I am so embarrassed on so many levels for it. A lot of it I stand behind, but boy, in hindsight, number one, I was a terrible writer. I'm still a terrible writer.
You were angry.
that was the whole thing. That was truly something written out of emotion, because I was a big Yuji Nagata fan. See, I'm one of the rare people. I didn't collect tapes or anything like that for the most part. I didn't look at newsletters. I was a newsstand person, and as much as I loved wrestling, I didn't have the money to tape trade, even if I wanted to anyway. So that was a different world. I didn't come up with All Japan. I started seeing New Japan tapes because there was a guy that actually had New Japan VHS tapes. So I started watching that. Then their connection with NWA and WCW, I was always that guy. So Yuji Nagata, I was a big fan of his. Big fan playing the game with him, always a TV champion with Yuji Nagata. In the short time that he was around, I liked him, and I started following his career and watching him get built up, and then seeing that, because again, I evolved a lot coming from a boxing and wrestling background. What I thought about mixed martial arts changed dramatically. Talking to Pat Miletich will do that to you, but it changed. I remember seeing the first UFC and seeing those fights and going, this is insane. This is unfair. These are, it's a weighted work. These are real fights technically, but it is weighted way to one side over the other.
Right.
And
especially the first tournament.
Yeah. So by the time they did Nagata and Crow Cop, I was cringing. And it just was like, why are they doing? And then it happened, and I was apoplectic. And then they did it all over again with Nakamura, who obviously I was a fan of his, looking at these new Three Musketeers that they have of Shibata, Nakamura, and Tanahashi. And then you got Yutaka Yoshi. You had a bunch of guys that, man, okay, the core seems like it's going to rebuild itself and be good. And then that happens with Nakamura. They book him how they book him with Takayama. It was no bueno for me, man. And yeah, I wrote that one out of anger and spite, and I might revisit it again because boy, it needs some annotations now.
So my older brother was a pretty dedicated martial artist in the late 80s, early 90s. And we talk about pro wrestling tape trading. Well, there actually was a thing that a lot of people don't know about where you could tape trade martial arts videos through like Black Belt magazine and different publications back then. And so my first like exposures to pro resu were not like the way how other people watch like Super J Cup or like IWA. Mine were like shoot style stuff that we didn't know if it was real or not. And that's how I first saw Enoki, because they would send over like the different style fights and like the UWF stuff along with Chuck Norris videos and along with like Hickson Gracie fights and Ballet Tudo stuff from like the 50s. And there were collections of people that used to trade that stuff. And that's like where I first saw like the legend of Enoki, and probably why I'm so maybe heartbroken that he's passed and everything like that. But his like you mentioned earlier, like the cobwebs of his connection to the MMA world are so vast. I mean, going back to the Ali fight and then the different style fights and everything like that. I think that obviously with like the shoot style and then like Sayama with the Shuto stuff and Pancrase, we're talking about all people that were Enoki disciples starting, mixed style fighting and no holds barred in Japan. But the one thing that was different from what they did versus what Enoki did was the spectacle. And that really didn't come into play until like UWFI, but to a greater extent, like Pride, where a lot of those guys, they had real fighting or quote unquote something that resembled real fighting, but they didn't have the spectacle. And that's what Enoki had in his heyday, where like they were almost like freak show fights, and it's funny because wrestling is so cyclical. If you go beyond Enoki and you go back to the 20s and the 1800s and everything that's old becomes new again, and it comes in waves. That's how wrestling is when it comes to real fighting, and then works and blah blah blah. And that's what Enoki was. He was making something that was old new again. Like it's very much Carney-esque, and that has always appealed in Japan when you see like Hoist Gracie fighting like Yokozunas and stuff like that. That's the sort of stuff that like Enoki did. And then parlaying that into his post career and with the UFO and with IFG and his connection to Pride and K1 and even like the LA dojo and him training like real fighters like Brock Lesnar and Lyoto Machida. Like Enoki has always, because of his sports icon status, been somewhat involved in the MMA community, especially in Japan, for years and years and years. I mean, even the Enoki Bombaye events on January 1st for like 5 years, they were competing with Pride and K1 and all these other different like groups as being like premier events that people sat down and watched for 5 or 6 hours on January 1st. So it's quite a legacy. And I mean, when you talk about the godfathers of MMA, I mean, people point to Bruce Lee, they point to Hoist Gracie. Enoki has to be one of those people that you point to that's like his influence and his innovations when it comes to what eventually became known as MMA. And even beyond that, MMA's infusion into pro wrestling, whether it be kick pads or tapping out or realistic submissions, these were things that didn't necessarily have a international influence prior to Enoki's how he influenced his trainees.
I think what from Inoki's point of view, I mean, it's definitely like if we're talking about it from an analytical perspective, and we're trying to say like Enoki could definitely be viewed as a very important martial artist type, especially in the modern era. But if you were to ask Enoki, I don't know this, but I would think in most of his interviews, he always referred to himself as a pro wrestler, regardless of what the setting or anything. He always stuck to that. What I do is wrestling. It's not martial arts. It's pro wrestling. I mean, if you wanted to include it in the martial arts, that was his idea he was trying to convey. this style of fighting, what I do is the best, and it's wrestling. So it's just kind of the way you think about it. Nothing really changes, just the perspective. And he had a very specific perspective on what he thought pro wrestling was and consisted of.
Right.
And he knew how to promote himself, which is there's a reason that there's lots of great fighters in this world and great martial artists of different disciplines, but they just don't have it. They don't connect for whatever reason. They're just not that guy until maybe they'll find an opponent that they get a great dance partner that they can create a legacy with. But a lot of times you just go down as like, man, that guy was really good. But then you're looking at, that Bob Sapp, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira fight, or you're looking at, one of those freak show fights.
Anything with Bob Sapp.
Yeah, anything that K1 and Pride put on because, yeah, there were the great undercard guys, but like you sold it on the big knockout, you sold it on the big freak, you sold it on whatever it was, and I was always in fear somebody was going to die. How somebody never did, I don't know. Especially on those Enoki show. That was another crazy part of those Enoki shows late, where he's like, they're losing to the NHK Red and White Festival. Meanwhile, you got a New Japan wrestler that's on the other guy's show, K1 or Pride show, and they're losing. It just, the whole thing was so wacky.
So crazy.
But he more than anybody else over there did really understand that, like, and because of loving the real sports and coming from those disciplines where, I mean, why do we watch two people fight? It's either for money, it's for a personal issue, or it's for quote unquote sport. Like, that's it. So, like, no matter if it's kickboxing, wrestling, judo, taekwondo, amateur, no matter what it is, when it's two half-naked people on a canvas mat, like, that's it. Like, they're only that's it. So you have to promote, all these things are promoted the same. That's why if you look at the history of any, film or cable or pay-per-view or streaming, fights always lead the way. Wrestling always leads the way. It's just, that's the way it goes. And to me, they're all sports that are promoted for all intents and purposes the exact same way. And Enoki understood that. He couldn't harness it. He wanted to harness it, but the horse had grown too big. It was way too big of a bucking bronco from the thing that he was trying to promote to everybody when he was facing Ruska, when he was facing Ali, when he was facing this person or that person, or wanting to bring in the Russian wrestlers like he did in the early 90s with New Japan, and bringing in those guys. Like, he had the great idea. It's just he didn't have just enough of the foresight to look ahead to go, this isn't about pro wrestling anymore. This is now about, like, actually not worrying about me working this. This is about guys, like, not working anymore. And just, again, this is where Justin's right. He did feel himself to be a pro wrestler because there was not that next step for him to take. And, as times evolved and moved on, it was easy for people to question him. What could have Enoki done against a Mirko, against a, this person or that person, and for him to kind of step back a little bit from that and go, well, I was always a pro wrestler first, and our rules be strongest. And I always said the right things, in that way. Absolutely always did.
Yeah. Mike, I think what you were talking about with, like, the difference between the performers who stick in our minds and the ones who, especially when it comes to MMA, they're simply good, but you have trouble talking about anything else. I think, okay, maybe the word or phrase professional wrestling isn't the right phrase for whatever it's become today, but the big difference here, what defines Enoki and others in MMA, in pro wrestling, from talent who just doesn't stick with it, is that idea of professional, that they're not just in the ring. The story doesn't end in the ring. They're like Enoki 24/7. They're trying to bring not only a fight to the audience, they're there to entertain and to draw. And you have to be a different kind of professional. You have to consider everything outside of the ring too. And I think pro wrestlers seem to understand that better than athletes, in that athletes generally have to focus on their sport. I mean, then it becomes a little bit of a different conversation, but that idea of professionalism, no matter what the setting, defines Inoki and defines others like him.
Well, look at the difference between two of Japan's greatest fighters, especially on the international stage. You got Yushin Okami, someone who's a great sportsman, a great fighter, but very few people probably remember or even know about. And then you've got like Sakuraba, who was a promoter, a character. He told stories,
a pro wrestler,
entertainer, a pro wrestler.
He still considers himself primarily a pro wrestler.
And it's interesting how he is sort of from that same lineage, but considers himself more of a pro wrestler than many of the guys that came before him who came from Enoki. And he's much more in line with that Enoki philosophy.
Yeah, he's more of a Billy Robinson disciple, like Barnett and Jake Shannon.
Yep, absolutely.
God, you talk about those tape tradings that would go on. The person that you would find to not mess with in the gym is if the subject of professional wrestling came up and they brought up one of those names, like Boss Rutan, like, you know, who I like Boss Rutan. I'm not messing with you. You obviously know more than than I'm willing to deal with right now. But, you know, yeah, I mean, are you in the sports business or are you in the sports entertainment business? Are you in the sports business, you know, or are you just in the sports business? You know, I love sport. This is what I do. This is who I am. You know, it's when, who was the WEC? Was it Mike Brown who knocked out, was it Pulver or Faber? You know, ended one of those.
You're right, Faber.
Yeah, and it was like, you know, man, this guy's so good. But
he couldn't capitalize on it.
Exactly. And he didn't have any shine. He didn't have any of that sort of stuff. So, you know, again, this is why, even though it drives some other more technical people nuts, it's why the people like Arturo Gatti, why the Kazushi Sakurabas of the world, why those types of guys will, you know, end up and go down in history and are remembered more, you know, than just the person who was. I mean, that's what I remember with Hideki Yoshida. Was one of the things with him was he, you know, big judo star, and he's going to be the next big Japanese guy. He just didn't have it, you know, and he did the thing where he took off the gi against Silva, which, you know, is his one time of showing some fire. And it's like, no, man, you should have left the gi on, because now you're just getting your ass kicked in a, you know, completely different way. But yeah, I mean, you know, again, Enoki and the best of pro wrestlers. Pro wrestling's it's a singular business. It is a business of outlaws, even in this day and age, you know, people who they don't want to work for anybody else. They basically want to work for themselves, and they want to be able to maneuver and have flexibility and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I mean, when you're always built up to be with a team and to think of things in that sort of way, you know, it's tough to try to break out of that and look at things. That's why a lot of football players have had issues, you know, when they've come into wrestling. The ones who don't get kicked out of the NFL, you know, in the 70s, guys walked away because they saw the money. You know, some of the guys that tried to get into wrestling and think it was, you know, the same type of thing. It wasn't.
Right. And you're talking a lot about, you know, you mentioned, you know, the business of professional wrestling and kind of handling business outside of being a wrestler and being professional. But I think too, with Enoki, as we wind down here, we got to talk a little bit about some of the scandals and just kind of his infamy of what happened outside of the ring. And we kind of touched on what happened with the UWF and some of the embezzlement scandals, you know, him leaving JWA, start Tokyo Pro Wrestling, and starting New Japan. And it seems like there's always kind of controversy following Enoki from the very beginning of his career right up into the end. Of course, there's the two big events that happened in North Korea, you know, two of the most attended pro wrestling shows in history. Of course, the government was forcing the attendance. And of course, you know, Enoki, he then goes on to run for politics in Japan and wins 2 elections and public offices, but has to leave both times due to scandals. So real quick, Justin, Mike, some of your thoughts on some of the scandals that surrounded Enoki.
Which way to go? Where to start? There weren't that many. It's just, I recently read, when I was reading obituaries about Enoki this week, it's not as much of a scandal, but it says a lot more about his commitment to being a pro wrestler. Once when he was speaking in front of the Diet, I forget which year it was, but they were talking about, Japan doesn't have a military. They have something called self-defense force. So it's basically like a military that's not meant to go and fight, but if there's a natural disaster or any other weird things, they have prepared people. So they were talking about that, and Inoki brought up a question. He asked, what would happen? What would the SSD do if Martians came? What would they do? How would they approach it? How would they protect us? He asked it as a serious question. People were really upset that he was taking the piss out of that's what they thought, but he never flinched on it. He was Antonio
Inoki. Be
Inoki.
sincere about it.
Well, the one person writing the obituary mentioned how that actually gave the administrators a chance to discuss a situation where, okay, what if an outside force did try to attack? What are some things we can brainstorm? And this person kind of appreciated Inoki's creativity and willingness to maybe look the fool, because he knew at the end he knew what he was doing, and a lot of it had to do with publicity, and a lot of it had to do with, hey, he's a pro wrestler.
And I think that's the big Antonio Inoki as politician. Was
not to be taken too seriously.
Yeah, you look at the type of work that, like, Hase has done. I think he may be the best example. I think
he works with the sports and recreation.
He's like the head of the fitness council,
yes,
and all that sort of thing. I mean, you see what he's done and what other people have done. You see what Enoki has done, and look, Enoki, he was able to run because of the way that the diet is set up over there. He didn't have to represent a particular region or anything like that. He was able to run off of his fame, and he was able to get himself into a great position. And one word that has not been brought up at the entire time here has been Yakuza. And obviously we know what their tentacles are, how deep they can go sometimes into pro wrestling, and certainly into mixed martial arts and fighting and all of that sort of stuff. How much did that play into him being driven out of office the first time, along with embezzlement, which was one of his fortes going back to the early 80s? And I believe it was Anton Hissel, the Brazilian biotech company that apparently the New Japan TV money was being bundled into. And, and as again, yes, TBSI stood by him, but if they didn't, what would have happened then? What could have happened? Those guys from UWF, they were able to go back to New Japan. He's a fascinating figure that way, but his politics certainly was more along the lines of a pro wrestler getting into politics, but where he gets again is just Enoki is, well, who else was able to go to North Korea? Sure, you can talk about wacky people like Dennis Rodman who did, but it's still Enoki, and Enoki still went and met with Hussein and still was able to do some of the things that he's been able to do. So again, yes, is it a lot of work? Is it a lot of showmanship? Is it a lot of all that stuff? Yeah, but again, who else? Again, who? If not Enoki, who? If not Ali, and he's not here, who?
I think also Enoki, for better or worse, throughout the 90s and well, I guess you could even start with the whole UWF initial embezzlement scandal. Didn't seem to be above sacrificing people he worked with or people that worked under him. And I think when I use the word sacrifice, I really do think of guys like Kendo Kashin and Yuji Nagata, who were kind of, Inoki was old at the time. He couldn't fight in Pride. No way. I mean, the Don Fry match was a pro wrestling match, and he was fit, but he wasn't. Don't put him in a Pride match. And I think he saw himself as such a big character, which he was. But you know what? When that kind of stuff happens, people change, and he really did believe, I'm sure, that booking Dos Caras Jr. in a match would be a good idea in Pride, or putting having the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, the standing IWGP Heavyweight Champion, take a bout with Crow Cop on only a few days' notice. Like, I know that like in the States, the loss of innocence for pro wrestling fans officially has to be like when Vince got on the TV and said we're sports entertainment. In Japan, I think you could point to this era of guys like Nagata getting mauled by people from Europe, unknowns that they'd never really heard of before until Pride, K1 and such. And I think that definitely changed the makeup of the general Japanese fan and market at the time. Is their loss of innocence as well.
Yeah, I think Takada had a lot to do with that too. And I think because, like, to me, you can obviously and absolutely make a case for Enoki and Takada to be in MMA Hall of Fames in some respect, as far as them being, being honored in some way, the same way you would honor an announcer or something like that in the baseball or football Hall of Fames. I think there's a place for them. But, like, yes, the Hickson work with Takada, but again, what happened after that? And then to see, like, almost to a person, these guys, Minoru Suzuki or Yuji Nagata or Kashin, or I mean, down the line of how many guys had one-off fights and got knocked out, or got beat up. Manabu Nakanishi, when you start thinking about jungle fights and, guys in rings that should have never been in rings, and then guys in Pride and K1. And again, too, that's the other part. And I know this is going off on a different tangent, but like, talk about a few days' notice on Nagata. Stefan Lecco, I'm trying to think of the fight he had in his debut with Pride where his back was screwed. He should have never been in there. And he was basically in there on short notice because of the way that they would work these fights. Letting somebody know on short notice they have a fight. Throwing money at this person, throwing a bunch of people at this person's door the night before, whether it be women and booze and drugs and this and that. Like, it was such a bizarre time. It's such a bizarre time.
To me, it's very much, this is just me speculating from years of studying it, but to me, that I don't want to say booking, but that like putting talent in these really weird, generally bad non-sports like conditions that you wouldn't really experience in any other professional sports. I think that's more of a Fuji TV technique. And I know, like, if you remember, I forget who Mark Coleman fought, but he got his ass kicked, and then they had his kids come into the ring. Remember Fedor. That? Was it Fedor? Yeah, and his little girls were like crying.
Oh, the most disgusting one to me is still Tadao Yasuda, where they do the whole thing and him coming back. He's bankrupt. He's gambling too much, and they have his daughter in the front row, and he goes out on a stretcher, and it's like, holy shit.
Yeah. And
it was great. And the thing is, we do it here too. I remember the oh god, who was it? Was it Manny Pacquiao? No, who was it? There was a fight. They kept showing this poor woman in the crowd. Oh, it was Miguel Cotto's wife. When Cotto fought the dude who had his gloves all plastic. Antonio Margarito. And they're showing his wife screaming, and it's like,
yeah, it was bad.
Yeah, we're no better.
It's funny because at the beginning, Justin, you were like, "There's not that many scandals, but there's so many scandals."
Yeah, but like something like that, I would say, like, that's another part of the whole story too. I think we got to understand how much more the television companies are involved with pro wrestling over in Japan. Like in the 80s, especially that war, All Japan, New Japan. I mean, that's what it was, but what it was in reality was NTV versus TV Asahi. And Fuji TV has always they're like a little edgier, a little more like quote unquote realistic base. I don't know. The aesthetic is different, but if you stretch it to more recently, they also put on this show called Terrace House, which Hana Kimura was on. And it's more of like a Fuji TV. That's the nature of certain channels or people and Japanese businesses sometimes don't take into account like it's all about the rating.
Right.
No matter what. Sensitivity, especially to foreign talent, it's just not what they're thinking about. I think, and when you're dealing with money like that, and you're dealing with huge ratings like that, there is that pressure to go even bigger. And I think I don't want to like put blame on Inoki, but I think parts of it are it's from all over. But
Right.
yes, he is involved or around scandal, the North Korea thing, especially. I mean, fighting spirit, diplomacy was just, what was what it was, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it did anything.
We're gonna move on to the last subject, but a couple things I just wanted to mention because you guys did a great job on a lot of the stuff, but a few things that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about was, there was obviously the criticism that he stayed on top too long. There was the issue that he didn't put over anybody on the way out, essentially, aside from like the 1 year when he lost to Tenryu. And that whole thing is very interesting because it's like he was building UFO. He had Ogawa kill Hashimoto. So that
Another sacrifice.
Yeah, he sacrificed Hashimoto so he could have Ogawa as the domestic ace and Don Fry as the foreign ace. And he could have put Ogawa over on the way out, but he had Don Fry go over so he could beat Don Fry. So he could be in a position where he beat a UFC superstar on the way out, which was kind of crazy. There's obviously the incident where he allegedly told a drunk Andre to shoot on Maeda. And as recently as just a couple years ago, he was in an interview with Maeda and they asked why that match never took place. And he said, I was afraid of Maeda because, the reports are that like guys like Fujiwara and Maeda probably could have beaten him in a real fight. And you never knew what would happen with Maeda had that, money match actually taken place. There was the incident where he entered the ring and he punched out Nakamura after he just got defeated in an MMA fight. There's the infamy of him buying Castro's island and naming it Friendship Island because he thought that there was going to be, potentially buried treasure on it.
I forgot about that one.
There's also, him negotiating with Saddam allegedly, and there's like people that say he just happened to be in the right place at the right time and he gets more credit for negotiating for those hostages as well as negotiating with North Korea. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It's part of his legend. We don't really know. And again, double crossing Hashimoto. There's just a lot of things that like this guy's life is so interesting. Like, and at the end of this, we'll point you guys to some other resources if you want to do more research. But like, yeah, there's a lot of scandals, a lot of infamy, and he was a pro wrestler.
Yeah,
at the highest level.
And Josh, one thing you mentioned, and Justin mentioned it too, about sacrifices and some talent that didn't, get the rub from working from Enoki. You look at Enoki's, 20-year career, and just some of the names that were there that really didn't benefit from being with Enoki. You look at Tatsumi Fujinami. He never won a singles match against Enoki, got a time limit draw in 88. Then you look at Keiji Muto, one singles match in 94, Enoki won. Hashimoto, 0 singles matches. Chono, 0 singles matches. Sasuke, Tenzan, Kojima, Nagata, all 0 singles matches against Enoki, not really putting into this generation of guys. And, Mike, you mentioned, the treatment of Shinsuke Nakamura. We had Shibata, who was kind of frustrated during that time period and leaving. And so you look at all these talent that were there during that time period, and kind of when Enoki was leaving, guys who were just like you mentioned, Justin, just kind of sacrificed, and guys who could have been, maybe bigger stars than they were. We talk about Nagata a lot. It's like that big, like, what if Nagata wasn't put in that situation? Could he have been a bigger star than what he was? Would he have helped even more during that kind of dark age of New Japan? Of course, we love Nagata now, but I'm wondering if he would have been seen to even a higher level if he had not been put in that compromising position.
One last thing. He helped finance WrestleMania by giving Vince McMahon Jr. a loan of $1 million, and then they paid it back to him and cut ties immediately, stopped getting dates on Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, that was a big the relationship between Vince Sr. and Inoki was, I mean, that was the counterpart to the NWA, that alliance, until Hulk Hogan blew up and Vince Jr. took control and cut ties. They even had a press conference in Japan officially cutting ties, but he's everywhere.
Yeah, and when we were talking about big programs, and we can't name them all. I mean, the Andre feud was like the big money annual, match that they did for a decade that like helped sustain, the legend of Enoki as well. But as we wind down, I guess I'll kick it to all you guys. As far as Enoki, just final thoughts, innovations, his signatures, his accomplishments, his retirement tour, favorite memories, and like what is his legacy ultimately to you?
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. The more I think about it, if you had that Rushmore and you only had 4, Enoki would be an easy fit to be on it, because there's a lot of different ways to look at pro wrestling, but as far as the pro wrestler himself, you can run a business, you can be a booker, all these as far as a pro wrestler and taking it to the absolute max, is there anybody bigger than Antonio Inoki? And he was very lucky that he had the right willing dance partners. But, that's just how this thing works sometimes in nature and in fate, like Ali. Hey, we could be talking about Muhammad Ali fighting Lyle Alzado. That happened too. It really did happen. But we're not. But we'll talk about Enoki until, forever. We'll be talking about that, long past we're gone. So, he is, in some ways, the ultimate pro wrestler, did things his way, ran his own company, and to his very dying day, could still go almost anywhere in the world. And yeah, there's been a lot of shine taken off of him for a lot of the things that we mentioned and we've talked about, but he was such a huge, enduring, larger than life personality and star that I mean, the epitome of pro wrestling. He just an amazing, amazing figure in almost every single way.
And I think the one extra special thing about Inoki is, in addition to everything Mike said, he's also in a unique position. Baba had passed away before MMA bloomed into what it is, and he was a huge part of that. Not unlike Rikidozan was, it's a different idea, but Rikidozan helped establish and cultivate pro wrestling in Japan, and I think Inoki not exactly did that, but intentionally or not, he was a center part of that. I can't think of many people who have such a wide-reaching influence too. I mean, I don't think like Vince McMahon is Vince McMahon, but his world was limited to certain. It wasn't as international as I guess Inoki's was. He did a lot of his work internationally, Inoki. I mean, and there's so many things outside of wrestling that he was a part of, like from North Korea to being huge in Italy to being one of the main people to bring Tabasco sauce to Japan. I mean, hostage releases, the World Peace Festival, which we didn't talk about, which was, looking back, it had its
huge
important moments for certain careers too. And we were talking about it earlier. If it wasn't for Inoki, a lot of wrestlers would have had very, very different careers. A lot. The idea of like putting over people on his way out. I know when he left New Japan initially, like 89, 90, I always kind of saw that as Choshu's era. And it was kind of Choshu's responsibility to get Three Musketeers and company over because Inoki just got too big for pro wrestling, I guess. But I guess that's another thing too. He's somebody who, like The Rock, transcended pro wrestling in ways. Of course, I would say The Rock is probably more similar to like a Santo. We went the entertainment route. He's a huge worldwide entertainer, whereas Inoki, talk about your own path. I mean, we could keep going and going with this. There's topics that we probably didn't hit that we could talk about for even more. And it's from Enoki.
Mexico. I mean, we didn't even bring up Mexico and the UWA and Connect taking kind of the same formula that Enoki had, and Bruno kind of used the same thing. And that tie-in, it would take hours. It would take hours upon hours, and you still couldn't hit all of it. And the fact that you have to bring in so many people to talk about so many different aspects of it, because he does range so wildly with his successes. Again, it's just man, with Muda and him, unfortunately, I at least got to see Muda's run as a wrestler, and I got to see pretty much the whole thing and being able to go back on tape, being able to live through it. With Inoki, I didn't have that. He came along and he was more of a unicorn. I knew him for the Ali fight. I knew him from the magazines, but there was not a whole lot to see. And when you did see the one-off thing, without context and really truly understanding, it's tough to really. He's like, what? He's not really doing all that much. Well, the greats don't.
Yeah.
At that point, he certainly did it. So we're going to be unpacking him for a lot longer than I think we expect to, because I think people are going to do more deep dives in and go further past back just the death of New Japan and the rise of MMA and just the Ali fight. There's so much more to talk about with him, and there's so many avenues you can take it, and so many different ways you could take, and so many different stories you could get out of it.
Yeah, I think that at this point, and it's funny, every week we put out a questionnaire, people that want to ask questions. This is one of the only weeks that we've gotten almost no questions in almost 5 years of doing the podcast. And on this topic, we got basically none. And what it tells me, I think it's number one, there's a lot of modern fans that are unfamiliar with Enoki and maybe his legacy and his impact. And also there's still those negative resentments for modern fans where they feel like all they really remember is like, at one point this guy did different style fights, and then there was Enokiism and it almost killed the business, and that's about it. And it's my hope that through this period people become more educated on what his influence and his impact really was. Even I would probably disagree with some of the I know there is a modern view that he didn't put a lot of guys over on the way out, but the reality is this guy was done in 88. And everything that he pretty much did after 88 was just dome shows where he came back and worked big, main events like The Rock or like Stone Cold Steve Austin. He wasn't an active wrestler and he wasn't booking. That was all Choshu, like you guys mentioned. But like, you look at the guys that he did, even if he wasn't putting over people, I mean, he made Hulk Hogan, he made Stan Hansen, he made Fujinami to a certain degree. He made Ricky Choshu. He made Vader on the in the tail end of his career, which like the Vader and the Hogan losses are two of the most shocking moments in the history of pro wrestling. And you look at the accomplishments, like you guys mentioned, winning a championship in Mexico, the WWF title, and this guy's a 12-time world champion. Obviously, he was booking himself, but for a good reason. He was the top star. And I mean, he was a cultural star. He was a wrestling star. He was international. I mean, he traveled literally all over the world. He wrestled in Brazil and in Mexico and in Madison Square Garden and in Russia and in South Korea and in Italy and just literally all over. He went to India. I mean, how many like modern wrestlers can we think of that had that sort of global impact? I mean, we know people that went in Canada. We know people that went to like the major markets, but we don't know too many people that were going to all these places and were able to draw and be on top and have the kind of influence and just impact that Enoki did. Like he's one of a kind, really, when you really think about it. There's not too many people that you can draw that one-for-one comparison. And then you think about even just like the funny things, like him slapping people to transfer his fighting spirit. He innovated the enziguri later in life after the Enoki fight because his kicks were so feared, and he needed to find a better way to finish opponents and kind of change his style. Even the red towel that became part of the scarf and his chain,
it's like Elvis.
Yeah, there's just so many things. And I mean, like you guys said, we could sit here and talk about Enoki forever because he was so influential.
Didn't even talk about his Hollywood wife. I don't know what Hollywood is over, or what Bollywood or Hollywood is in Japan, but I mean,
yeah,
he had a
she was in the Kurosawa movies.
Yeah, she was in Kurosawa movies. So it's like,
And there was an infidelity scandal with that too.
Yes, and you know, and there's a whole personal side of him to unpack that. Again, you only got so close. Only certain people were able to get so close into that circle to really know what that is, and that's why I think also as time goes on, we may hear more stories of what it was like, you know, to be around Enoki. You know, just because there's so many stories that have never been told. You know, and there's interest in, and certainly, I'm sure there's a lot of interest in hearing a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, Inoki's legacy, like you guys mentioned, he just transcends pro wrestling, MMA, sports, just pop culture. Like we mentioned, the Ali fight. I mean, you could ask non-wrestling fans, non-boxing fans about that Ali Inoki fight, and people will be able to remember that and tell you about that. I've talked with older family members who like, yeah, I remember that was a big deal, and kind of remembering that Inoki fight. And you know, for kids of me and Josh's generation, if you watched the Pokemon cartoon in season 1, there was an Inoki like character, a tall guy with the big chin and the red scarf in that cartoon. There's so much in
Yu-Gi-Oh too.
Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh, so much in media where he kind of transcended it and was just kind of this big kind of cultural icon. Like I mentioned earlier, you just see all these different news sources across the world that
News Bears.
Yeah, he was in the Bad News Bears sequel. He played a kind of monster in a really old movie with Ricky Dozan, where this is the only time he technically wrestled Dozan was in this movie. He was kind of like this Martian alien guy that Ricky Dozan beat up. He appeared even before Pokemon. He was on the 1968 or 69 Tiger Mask cartoon. He was one of Tiger Mask's opponents. So, and he was in commercials constantly. And the last time I was in Japan a couple of years ago, I was walking to the station and saw his face on some ramen restaurant he was doing an ad for. He was on commercials. It's like we keep saying it, but he has transcended pro wrestling in a deep way. And I think the fact that if people don't know about it, this is a great way to, you know, understand who he was, because I think understanding Inoki helps you understand so much of modern pro wrestling. You know, I understand that it's like trying to get into Frank Zappa's collection like today. it's so layered, but you got to start somewhere, and there's tons of resources out there to start with. Like, I mean, Josh Gross has that book that's just about the Ali fight. That's just one. I mean, think about how much we talked about today. There's a book on just one of those topics. So,
and there's people doing whole podcast series on just that book about the one fight, which is
it's
just a glimpse into, like, there's so much more that happened, and we'll feel his effect for, I mean, we've been feeling it, and I think we'll feel it more in years. And thankfully there's things like streaming services like New Japan World, YouTube, and just the internet podcast. There's so much, it's so much easier to learn about it now. So
before we let you guys go, I just want to let you know, this was a podcast that, because we're dealing with such a controversial and complicated and kind of heavy and important subject matter, I was like excited about it, but also kind of nervous, because I'm like, dang, like Inoki's the founder and this is a New Japan podcast, and I want to make sure we do it right. And you guys have made it both, I mean, obviously Jeremy, but both you, Justin, and Mike have made it, I feel, pretty special and very informative and enjoyable on my end. I feel like I could do this forever. But if you guys have, you know, final thoughts or, you know, plugs that you guys want to put out there for projects you guys have, and maybe even other supplemental resources that people might want to check out when it comes to the subject.
But real quick, before they get the plugs in real quick, I just want to mention, you know, with the lasting legacy of Inoki in New Japan, an announcement did come out that before he passed, that he accepted an honorary role with New Japan. They had initiated an announcement as a part of the 50th anniversary celebration. He decided to be the company's honorary lifetime chairman, and he accepted that invitation. It was supposed to be officially announced during the upcoming Declaration of Power event. He accepted that on September 1st, but obviously due to his passing, that big, you know, celebration was not going to happen. But in that role, it was to celebrate Inoki's contributions as founder, a wrestler, and beyond. So, you know, even though there was a rocky road with New Japan. It seemed like things kind of came full circle for him, and he was going to be celebrated, and they will continue to celebrate him. Like you mentioned, there's the playlist on New Japan World. So yeah, Justin, Mike, if you guys want to get your plugs in on stuff that you guys have been working on with Enoki and just other stuff that you guys have going on right now.
For me, I know that Fumi Saito and I did 5 podcast episodes on Inoki's life earlier this year. And if you go on Spotify or Apple and you type in Fight Game Media Network, that podcast feed has all of those up on their service. So there's that. Also, if you are into all kinds of different wrestling and you don't want to watch New Japan World, you want to add to it, sign up for Wrestle Universe right now, 2 weeks free. Yeah, that's right. Wrestle Universe is having 2 weeks free. You can watch Pro Wrestling Noah, you can watch DDT, Ganbare Pro, Tokyo Joshi Pro, some 01, all kinds of cool stuff. Get on that as well. And October 30th, Keiji Muto, who we talked about a little bit today, he'll be at Ariake Arena. Noah returns to Ariake Arena. That'll be exciting. I don't think I have any more plugs, though. There you go. Thanks, guys.
I just know if Sting and Muto are gonna be anywhere near each other, and Sting is bringing Darby Allin along. That's got to mean good things for Ninja Mac. In my mind, that means good things for Ninja Mac if that happens. But
that sounds very interesting.
So you can find me, well, in a variety of places, doing a variety of things with a variety of different personalities, sometimes just within myself. But Wrestling Observer Live every single day with Brian Alvarez and I are more of a general professional wrestling type of show, speaking about all sorts of things happening in WWE and AEW mostly, but also on the WrestlingObserver.com website. It is the Big Audio Nightmare. That's where that is housed, where we have been doing that since 2005. We have been doing that show, well, since New Japan was in the Dark Ages, actually, believe it or not. That's how long we've been doing shows together, Adam Summers and I. And the show relatively recently, it's been a while now, became free for everybody. So if you are on Apple, Spotify, Downcast, whatever it is you use to listen to your podcast, the Adam Mike Big Audio Nightmare is up there. And this past edition that we did not only speaks about Enoki, I also added in my 7-minute bio from the Wrestling News, and I'll get to that in a minute, as well as Stardom's 5-Star Grand Prix and audio from a show that Adam and I did earlier on in the pandemic where we watched Enoki and Bob Backlund from November of 1979. And we talk about some of the wackiness that took place around that, including, was he really trying to keep the belt in Japan with Saki? There's all that. We talk about all that stuff. And also the Wrestling News, which I just mentioned as well, too, which I am really proud of. I'm really happy to do every single day between 8 and 20 minutes a day. We're going to give you all of the top professional wrestling news that you need to know. Dave and Brian are going to have at least an hour-long show, and you never know what could be taking place with what takes Dave off track. There's plenty of shows that are great, including this one, to review things that happen in the world of professional wrestling. We're just here to get you to those shows. I wanted to do a show that did not step on anybody's toes, didn't get in anybody's lane, but brought home the news every single day to somebody. If they're on the train, if they're on their way to school, if they're on their way to work, if they're on break, it gives you everything you need to know in the world of professional wrestling, crisp, clean, concise, without banter, without a whole bunch of nonsense involved in it, not a bunch of conjecture and opinion, none of that stuff, just the wrestling news. And you can find that at thewrestlingnews.com, at Wrestling News AV. It's on the Arcadian Vanguard YouTube page as well, too, but YouTube is always a hole for everything. So I always say avoid that and just listen to it yourself. If you got the Google gimmick or the Amazon gimmick, you could tell it to play it as well, too. So the Big Audio Nightmare, Wrestling Observer Live every day, and then also the Mid-Atlantic Championship podcast, which celebrates the history of Jim Crockett Promotions and follows along a lot of the TV that's on the WWE Network, as well as some stuff that's not on the WWE Network that we have in our archives and in our collections that we're going to be talking about and that we have talked about. So I do a lot of different stuff. So follow me on Twitter at Sempervive if you don't already, and I'll lead you to it. Trust me.
Nice. Well, Semp, Justin, thanks so much again for joining us to talk about Enoki. And like you guys mentioned, we could go on for hours and hours about just his legacy and what he means to the professional wrestling industry, what he meant to New Japan Pro Wrestling. So thanks again for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Let's do this again soon.
All right, and we...
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
Urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
it's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
You're back. It was so good having Mike and Justin on to discuss and cover the career and legacy of Antonio Inoki, especially for somebody like me who, you know, I know Enoki and I know some of the key facts and stories and figures, but, you know, kind of like you were mentioning before in the intro, Josh, you know, you've done a lot of watching and reading and of Enoki, kind of been a big kind of quote unquote, you know, flag waver of Enoki, especially
Enokiist.
Yeah, you've been an Enokiist in our like little wrestling circle of friends, and so for somebody who like me, who's really a lot of my Enoki exposure has become because of you, because you're like, yo, you have to watch this Andre match, you need to watch him and Vader, you need to watch this match, like because of you, you know, a lot of my knowledge of Enoki and just kind of his wrestling style is where I got that from, and so it was cool hearing, you know, you and Justin and Mike kind of share your perspective and knowledge and kind of dive deep into Enoki's career.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't really ever do stuff like this on this podcast, but like, you know, sometimes I feel like the perception of what we are is bigger than how we view ourselves as a podcast and our space in the community. And you know, sometimes I don't realize how other people view us and the perception. Like I think people think, and granted, we've had a lot of success, but I do think people sometimes think we're bigger than we are. And it was kind of surreal sitting with guys that I think are, you know, pillars of the wrestling community in Justin and in Mike, especially the amount of time that they've been contributing and working in and facilitating. So I was like kind of nervous to talk with them about Enoki.
Yeah, definitely a really big topic there. But yeah, I'm glad Semp and Justin could come on and lend their knowledge to us and to you guys, the listeners, and kind of help you, you know, look into Enoki, learn more about Enoki, and just kind of celebrate what he means to the wrestling world.
I was also nervous because once it's done, it's done. Just like anytime someone passes and you do a memorial or a burial or anything like that, and it's like you say your goodbyes, and it's, for me, it's kind of sad because I don't know if there are that many wrestlers. There's a lot of wrestlers I love from like well, I wouldn't say love. There's a lot of wrestlers that like I study and I like, but there's not too many people that I really go hard for. And I feel like you know, when Vader died, that was pretty difficult. When Warrior died, you know, whatever your thoughts of him were, which I'm not going to make excuses, but as a child, I loved him. And that was pretty sad. And when Flair dies, that's going to be rough. But this is right up there with that. Like, this is like one of my, I guess, heroes.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
You
we
know,
did have a question from Rich, though, that we didn't address that I feel like maybe you and I can just talk about real quick before we move on.
Yeah, Rich asked us whose philosophy between Baba and Enoki really won.
And what do you think about that, Jeremy? Because that's a tough one.
Yeah, that is tough. I mean, again, like you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people discredit Inoki's influence with the style of wrestling. I think people focus in on the Inokiism and the shoot fights and the MMA kind of stuff, and having wrestlers try to fight MMA fighters and lose. I think a lot of people really zero in on that, and not necessarily just him as a wrestler and the style of booking. And like we mentioned on the discussion with Justin and Mike, and we talked about that kind of that Hogan, booking style that he kind of developed, and we've kind of seen that really become a major kind of part of North American pro wrestling for the last 30 years. I know not everybody uses that formula, but we've seen it with Hogan and Cena and a lot of these bigger guys, kind of formula that Inoki kind of put out there. And then just too, like with some of the guys he trained, like you mentioned, Sayama and Tiger Mask, and training him and getting him over to his level and his influence there. And then also you look at Baba, where with Baba, again, like we talked about with Inoki, he was focusing on that strong style and trying to show that wrestling is real, where I felt like Baba just found, great wrestlers and told them to go out there to have that great professional wrestling match. And of course, you talk about the King's Road style, and I think a lot of that does come too from a lot of what Inoki was doing as well. So it's really hard to say, overall who really won. I think I'll see, Inoki's probably more influential and probably remembered more maybe than Giant Baba. Kind of transcends wrestling more than Giant Baba did. But I think both of their fingerprints are still all over current product today.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation, or you could even say a push. Because the reality is modern New Japan is closer in booking practice and storytelling style to King's Road than it ever was to what Strong Style was in the 80s and the 70s. So from that perspective, you might say like, oh, Baba won. But the reality is once you get outside of the turn of the millennium, both New Japan and All Japan, their styles start to amalgamate into one thing, especially post Inoki Exodus and post Inokiism in the dark days and the dark ages. Puroresu as a whole begins to meld into one kind of thing. And the different philosophies between these two guys, one was an evolution of the classic Southern wrestling NWA big match style in the tradition of your Harley Races and your Dory Funks and your Jack Briscoes and your Luthezes and that sort of thing. And then on the other side, you have Inokiism, which is the evolution of the Lancashire style and the Carl Gotches and that shoot style. And it's kind of revolutionary, but it's also hearkening back to the roots of pro wrestling. And both of these influences can be seen. I mean, like they mentioned on the audio, how Inoki brought in things that were distinctly martial arts, like the kicks and the stiff elbow strikes and the chops and the realistic submissions. These might sound like small things, but that's not really what you were seeing in All Japan in the, in the 70s. You know what I mean?
Right.
You were seeing something that was very similar to Terry Funk and Amarillo and all of that. Inoki was the one that brought in, just to kind of give you an example, you look at Bryan Danielson. Many people think he's the best wrestler in the world. He wears kick pads and he does headbutts and he does elbow strikes and he does knees and kicks. That's Inokiism. That is clearly, and he trained in the LA dojo. That's clearly in vein of that shoot influence. How many wrestlers are wearing kick pads today? Where do you think that comes from?
Right.
And Chris Jericho, guy doesn't even kick, and he's wearing kick pads.
Right, yeah. So many people wear kick pads. You mentioned a lot of submissions. Like how many people nowadays are doing Kimuras and straight arm bars and rear naked chokes and guillotines in their matches? I think that's Inokiism, that kind of blending of using these real holds, these MMA moves that you see finish fights. You know, a lot of times when we see flash finishes by strikes and stuff like that.
That's Enokiism.
Yeah, you see that a lot now in wrestling. So I think, again, it's kind of hard to say who really won, where I think their influence is still, both of them are there.
On Wednesday night when Mox beat Juice with a flash Juji Gatami or straight armbar or cross arm breaker, that's Enokiism. That's not something you would have seen under Baba. So they're different schools and philosophies that I think are both influencing modern performers and modern bookers, absolutely. But it's tough. And then when you do consider the longevity of Enoki as a cultural icon and also his influence on MMA, I am kind of inclined to say him, but it's hard to argue against that King's Road style and that long form storytelling and that beautiful, booking pattern that he laid out that was, in my opinion, superior to the booking practices and storytelling designs of Enoki.
Yeah. We had another question here from friend of the show, Zach Porter. He wants to know, when are we going to get the multi-part Enoki retrospective by the young boy?
It's fun. I'm not going to do it, I don't think, but I think I could easily do a year by year retrospective on Enoki and his life, and the information's out there. But if I ever did that, that'd probably be behind a paywall. Maybe if you guys are actually interested in that, you tell me, but I don't know. I don't know if that would be worth my time and efforts and energy.
Well, that's going to wrap up our Enoki discussion.
Oh, last thing. There is a special playlist that's out now on NJPW World that allows fans to celebrate the life of Enoki. Has a huge selection of matches, and a lot of them are in English, and a lot of them are free, even if you're not a subscriber to New Japan World. So that stuff is available as well.
I guess real quick, do we want to talk briefly about some of the matches we watched this past week, or do we want to save that?
I figured we'd save that to the end, but we can talk about it now because we threw out the format this week, so there's not recommended match of the week and wrestler excursion match of the week. Jeremy, what matches did you watch this week, and what were your thoughts on them?
Yeah, so I went on to the playlist there on New Japan World, and I watched a couple different things from some different years. So I watched Enoki versus Tiger King, which was obviously Tiger Mask.
97.
Yeah, Sayama coming back to face off against Enoki during the Enoki retirement tour.
It's a pretty important match, yeah.
In which there was a big, falling out between Sayama and Enoki, which caused, Sayama to leave and him to, give that Tiger Mask gimmick to Enoki, which Enoki would then end up selling off to Baba in All Japan. And also that created Misawa and on from there. But yeah, them kind of coming back together here, having this big match. And Tiger Mask at that, I don't remember how old he was there, but also he was definitely
heavier and older.
Yeah, but he was still moving very light, floating across the ring, and that was it's a really fun match because it's like, I don't know, it's like you think of your super heavyweight top star guy against your best high flyer guy.
It's a dream match that could have never have happened in the 80s, although it should have, because they were the top two draws and stars at a certain point, especially 82, 83. But, the whole reason Sayama left is because they wouldn't push him at the top, even though he was a big enough of a cultural icon to draw and maybe even be the successor. But they still had that mentality that a small guy couldn't be at the top, and they were favoring Fujinami and then the embezzlement scheme, and he ended up leaving to help form UWF. But it's a dream match in every sense of the word.
Yeah, and especially because you look back at Enoki's, his whole career, he didn't really wrestle guys like Tiger Mask. You don't really see him wrestling smaller guys or high flying guys, and so to see just to see what it was like for Enoki to kind of mix it up with somebody like Tiger Mask was
maybe connects the closest thing in Mexico.
Yeah. And again, both of those guys with just huge crowd reactions. It was fun watching that. Also, I watched Enoki versus Dr. Death, Steve Williams from October 25th, 1987.
That's a little bit of a rare match, and I haven't ever seen that one.
Yeah, that was really fun. big fan of Dr. Death, Steve Williams, back in the day, and again, he's another one of those like foreign monsters that we talked about that kind of came in and did business with Enoki. So watching that was also a very fun match, and obviously Dr. Death was kind of a bruiser in that match, and Enoki was fighting from underneath and having to come back and prevail against Steve Williams, and Dr. Death was hitting with big suplexes and slams, and then Enoki coming back with a lot of strike-based offense there, and then that one ended in a count out. If I remember correctly, Enoki hit that the enziguri, and then that led Dr. Death to get counted out on the outside. But that was a fun matchup.
And that one's also interesting too, because Dr. Death would become so integral and important to the mythos of All Japan. But at this time, they because New Japan had lost the WWF deal in '85, they were venturing out and working with other groups, including Mid-South / UWF, and they got an early version of Dr. Death before he made his way to All Japan. And so this kind of was like pre, Triple Crown Steve Williams, which is interesting.
Yeah. Also watched Enoki versus Crusher Bam Bam Bigelow from February 9th, 1989.
The first ever IWGP version 2 title defense.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I was surprised. The crowd seemed a little bit dead for this match. Like, they weren't as rampant as you see in some other Enoki matches, and I don't know quite.
Well, business is down. It's
Okay.
87, and they're starting to go through a lull. Plus, Bam Bam Bigelow is a relative rookie in the business, and especially in Japan, and is not as much of a known commodity and hadn't really made his name just yet. He's sort of like your monster of the month at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think Enoki had to work a little bit harder to get the crowd into this. But yeah, he was a good matchup there with Bigelow, which ultimately it led to the post-match angle where Vader comes out and destroys Enoki post-match, and Enoki and Bigelow are beating down Enoki, which I'm guessing was to set up another match of Enoki and Vader. And then the last match I watched one of his matches with Andre the Giant. I'm trying to remember which one it was.
What was the finish? And maybe I can tell you.
I think it ended in I think it was a count out. Maybe I'm forgetting now.
Did Andre get posted and then bleed, then get counted out?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he was wearing red trunks.
Yeah, that's the 76 match, I believe. That's for the WWF martial arts title.
Yeah.
Did he come out with a silver belt?
Yeah.
That's the martial arts match. So that was technically one of the quote unquote different style matches, although it's really just a wrestling match. You could probably attest to that, I would assume, right?
Yeah, I didn't see anything that would have made it quote unquote different than a normal pro wrestling match.
It's marketed and booked as a different style match and counted as one of his MMA-esque matches, although it isn't. And that one's one of the better ones. I prefer the first meeting they ever had, the 74 Brazil match from Sao Paulo. And that's on New Japan World as well. It's worse quality from video, but I think that's the youngest version of Andre and kind of the most inventive match that they've had, although that one has a bad finish as well. The reality is because they ran that series of matches for basically a decade, they couldn't have finishes. So, Andre wasn't really beating Enoki, and if he was, it was going to be a count out or a DQ, and same way with Enoki. And it wasn't until, I believe, like 85 or 86 when Andre's pretty much done in Japan that Enoki beats him with a Fujiwara armbar, and he's like one of the only people on record to have submitted Andre. But the one that you watched is generally considered one of the most famous and preferred matches between them. And I don't know what your thoughts were on just the general action. I actually like that match. I like the finish because Andre does a pretty good blade job, and it's, for as far as countouts go, it's a pretty good countout finish.
Right, and I think, a lot of people normally, crap on count out finishes or, draws or stuff like that, but I think there is a compelling way to do count outs, and I think this is an example here when you have this kind of big monster that you're facing, and you have a hard time holding him down to pin him. You have a hard time trying to submit him. So you gotta kind of knock him out. And like you mentioned, the blade job that Andre did was good. Had the crimson mask, and it just kind of made Enoki look like this, super, human guy, where he was able to, knock out Andre the Giant, have him bleeding buckets of blood, and Andre's just laying there a bloody mess. So yes, it was a count out, but you look at the visual of a bloody Andre on the outside and Enoki standing tall in that time period. If you're watching, you're like, man, like,
yeah,
Enoki just slayed this giant. Like, people weren't caring that it wasn't a pinfall or submission. You're just like, wow, like, Enoki made this guy bleed. He can't get back in the ring. Like, this is a real deal.
Well, it's also because Enoki was considered like this incredible technical wrestler, kind of like Bret Hart in his heyday. You look at Bret Hart and you consider his matches with big men like Diesel or Yokozuna, and it was like believable that he could beat a big man because he was so technically sound. Well, that was pretty much how Enoki was viewed, except for combine that with the fact that he had lethal kicks and lethal chops.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, he could mat wrestle with this guy and knock him out if given the opportunity. But at the same time, it's the eighth wonder of the world. And I mean, one thing I'm glad you got to watch that match, because you probably got to see Andre wrestle a little bit, which Andre didn't really wrestle too much with too many people, but he always wrestled with Enoki. And even if that's not everyone's cup of tea, the crowd ate it up. And like anytime there's an exchange, which they had their famous spots that were pretty much set out through most matches, like they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you got to at least see one Andre Enoki match, which they're all pretty good, honestly.
Yeah. Which matches did you check out?
I didn't really check out too much, but I mean, I can point you guys to stuff that's really good. I mean, when I say I've seen most of his like catalog, I've seen most of it. The 8-8-88 match with Fujinami, which is the final time that Enoki ever challenged for the title. It is a time limit draw, but it's legendary. It's probably the best Enoki match of the 80s. That's one definitely worth checking out. Obviously, the 1975 Billy Robinson hour-long draw that we also reviewed recently is considered one of his best matches. He has a match with Jack Briscoe in the 60s that was for many years considered the greatest match in Japanese wrestling history. That one's long too. That one's got to be up there. The 87 match with Masa Saito, where they break down the ring and they get handcuffed together, and he ends up bludgeoning Masa Saito until he's a bloody pulp and just knocks him out. That's a famous visual. He had several matches with Choshu in 88 that are pretty famous, but the finals of the 84 Revolutionary Army versus Hantai match, and the finals when it ends up being him and Enoki against one another, that's on New Japan World. That's one of the most electric environments you'll ever see. And when he beats Choshu, like, it's incredible. The finish against Hogan in 83, the IWGP, that's another thing too. We didn't even get to really talk about numbers, and some of these numbers are hard to verify, but I mean, the match with Hogan, here's how crazy the match with Hogan is. People don't understand this. All through the 70s and leading into the early 80s, New Japan did not have a governing body, and so there were no set New Japan or IWGP titles. And leading into the early 80s, there was the NWF title, which was like the world title, basically. But there was also an NWA international title, which was Sakaguchi's belt. There was a Caribbean title that Abdullah the Butcher had, and there was also there was another NWA North American title. That actually, the North American title was Sakaguchi's, and the international title was Tiger Jeet Singh's. And they vacated all four belts when they announced in 81 that there was going to be an IWGP. And they built for 2 years to the IWGP tournament. And the idea was this was going to be a tournament that determined the best of the best of the best in wrestling, and all other titles, including the NWA title, which Baba and them had over there, are irrelevant, because the only tournament that really matters is this IWGP title. And they built to it for like 3 years. And then the finals come down to Babyface Hogan and Babyface Enoki in a Super Dream match, tag team partners, the top Gaijin versus the top domestic star of, all these years. And Hogan beats him. And 36 million people watched it live. People don't realize 36 million people saw that.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really, really crazy. Also, my favorite Enoki different style match is the Eddie Everett match. It's listed as Monster Man. I think it's from 77 or 76. In that match, that one's awesome because there's not very much grappling. It's just a lot of striking, and watching Enoki fight a kickboxer and having to like not get beat up and try to like survive is incredible. But at the end of the match, he takes Eddie Everett and he gets him in a pile driver position, and he goes to powerbomb Eddie Everett. But Eddie Everett doesn't know how to take a powerbomb because he's not a worker. So he ends up in the hangman's position, like he's gonna take a Styles Clash.
Yeah.
And Inoki's like, I got to powerbomb this guy. So he just thrusts him forward a little bit and brings him down like high angle on his shoulders.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And before the referee can stop the fight because he's clearly knocked out, Inoki hits the ropes and gives him a leg drop.
Hold us, brother.
And that's my favorite different style fight that he ever had. But there's other good stuff. Even the 96 Vader match where Vader gives him high angle German suplexes that almost kill a 52-year-old Antonio Inoki. That's got to be one that's considered. Everything I just mentioned, those are all gold and big highlights and stuff that's well worth watching. And more. There's a lot more than we're even talking about. It's out there.
Yeah. So now I think that will wrap up our discussion on Enoki. Let's jump into what's going on in New Japan today. First thing we got to do is crown our September Wrestler of the Month and Match of the Month.
It was a down month. I'm going to name Enoki.
Oh, man. But no, for September, for the Wrestler of the Month, think we're going to go with the current IWGP US champion, Commonwealth Kingpin, Will Ospreay, mainly off of the incredible matchup with David Finlay at the conclusion of this Burning Spirit tour. And just Ospreay's presence throughout the tour. I know Finlay was another option we considered. He did have the win in the elimination match, and probably his best match in his career against Ospreay. But, you throw in kind of kayfabe in the side too, and Ospreay did end up winning the match, and we knew a big part of that match was Ospreay. And I think just the way Ospreay and United Empire have been presented this month in Strong, in the UK, and here in Japan, I think really kind of lends to Ospreay getting the Wrestler of the Month here.
Yeah, it was not a strong month for too many people. Part of that is because of the amount of cancellations on the tour for various shows and issues. And then also the fact that a lot of the bigger stars and, foreign talent that were scheduled for the tour were not really readily available until the tail end. Plus, there wasn't a lot of big things going on in North America with New Japan of USA. So it really did just kind of come down to the big match with Ospreay and Finlay. And I honestly, we could have gone Finlay, but we tend in situations like this to go with the person that won the bigger accolade, which was a defense of his title for Ospreay. And so we're kind of going to just land there. But it is kind of like Finlay could have won it, but if Finlay had won the title, we'd absolutely be naming him Wrestler of the Month. But because it was Ospreay who happened to retain, he's going to be our Wrestler of the Month this month. But, this was a little unlike other Ospreay months. It wasn't like Ospreay had a blow-away month. He had one good match, really.
Right, and partly of that because he wasn't on majority of the tour at the beginning part. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Our match of the month, again, is Ospreay and Finlay. We did a an entire review last week, and if you haven't caught that, definitely check that out. We gave you all of our thoughts, and still, in my opinion, one of the best matches in New Japan this year. I think it's a little underrated according to the reception I'm seeing on like Cage Match and stuff. But if you haven't seen that match, check it out. It is our match of the month for the month of September, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because you got October here.
What? I realized that when I was reading through, I was like, wait a minute, we're starting October. It's what I was thinking. But yeah, we're naming the September Wrestler of the Month and Match of the Month.
But luckily, earlier today, the full card for Declaration of Power was released, so we are going to have a review of that for you here now. And Jeremy, what do you want me to do? You want me to run down the card? We can talk about it, or you want to go match by match? How do you want to do this?
I think we can go match by match and maybe kind of give some quick thoughts about each matchup here.
Sure.
So the first matchup here is the Ren Narita homecoming match. Narita is coming back from excursion, and he'll be teaming up with Dave Finlay to take on he'll be teaming with Dave Finlay and Robbie Eagles, and they'll be taking on Doki, Despy, and Kanemaru from Suzuki-gun.
Yeah, I think this one's interesting in the sense that, like, typically you would look at this and this match doesn't seem out of place on any regular New Japan undercard, whether that be a Road to show, a New Japan of USA show, or even, like a produce show. I mean, it's kind of just there. But what makes it special is that it's Ren Narita's return to New Japan, which seems to signal the idea that he is returning from excursion. And I don't really know what to expect from that. If he's going to come in super traditional, in the vein of Shibata and your traditional young lion look with the black tights, the black trunks, and the black kick pads, and just kind of be what he's been all throughout his young lion days and his excursion, or if he's coming in with some sort of gimmick or character, which I would say doesn't seem to be the case. There's been no interviews, there's been no vignettes, there's been no nothing to indicate to us that he's changing in any way, which is maybe fitting considering the type of hard-nosed, no nonsense wrestler that he is. But since it is his return, the real question is, and we wouldn't be asking this if it was like let's say if a New Japan of America or a Road to show, but since it's his return, is he coming in to eat this pin, considering he's teaming with David Finlay and Robbie Eagles? Or are we looking at a situation where Red Narita is going to put a Narita special on like Kanemaru or Doki and pick up a big first, return win here in this opener for Declaration of Power in Sumo Hall?
I hope it's the latter. I hope it is him coming in and getting the big win. Like you mentioned, it's going to be interesting to see kind of what the presentation is going to be like. Like you mentioned, no vignettes or anything to think that it's going to be a different name or character or appearance. But I really think he needs to get a win here. And we've talked about this with the kind of the youth problem that New Japan is having right now. And we have a lot of, we have an aging roster and a lot of aging stars, and we need to get more fresh blood in the mix. And so I think having Narita come in here and get a big win and kind of start this, start this climb of him becoming a main player in New Japan would be very good. They did a great job of him on New Japan Strong. I think getting him over, he had a lot of big wins and moments on that show. This coming Saturday, he's going to face Juice Robinson, which I'm hearing was a great match, and he cut a really good promo leading into that match this week too. And so I think he did develop really well on Strong, and I think you could take what they did on Strong and just Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste that over to New Japan and make...
Is that how you copy and paste?
Yeah. Make him this, tough nose, no nonsense, heavy hitter, striker, tap out kind of guy, and I think that can really get over right now.
Nice. I'm predicting... I'm gonna go edgy here, and I'm gonna predict Narita with the Narita special on Doki, probably.
Which Narita special? The suplex or the submission?
The submission.
Okay. I'm gonna go with the suplex on Doki then, just to mix it up a little bit.
Nice.
So after that, we have Dangerous Techers, Taichi and Zack Sabre Jr. taking on the TMDK team of Bad Dude Tito and Shane Haste.
Not much to think about here. I think it is going to be fun and interesting to see an established long-term tag team like Dangerous Tekkers take on TMDK, Bad Dude Tito, and Shane Haste, two guys that have kind of just been recently brought into the company via TMDK and have really done well for themselves, teaming with Jonah, and kind of are almost sort of quasi part of the company now. And we'll have to see if that remains to be the case after this tour. But this is sort of feeling like a little bit of a blow off for them as far as this tour is concerned. But we're not far off from World Tag League. And one has to wonder if Bad Dude Tito and Shane Haste are going to be involved in that, or if we're going to see Mikey Nichols and Shane Haste, rejoin together for that tour. But it feels like an open and shut win for Dangerous Tekkers. And, they just recently faced off against Naito and Zack Sabre Jr. And with there not being IWGP tag team titles on the line on this major card, and for the foreseeable future in Japan, doesn't seem to be the case until January. This might be Dangerous Tekkers sort of ramping up for a run in World Tag League and whatever might lay beyond that.
Yeah, I'm going to take the spicy pick here. I'm going to go my boy Bad Dude Tito and Shane Haste getting the win here just because of what you mentioned with World Tag League. And, Mad Mikey Nichols recently had a baby. I don't know if he's going to be back in time, but I feel like you need to establish some new teams and bring excitement to the tournament. So what better way than establishing Bad Dude Tito and Shane Haste by beating Dangerous Tekkers and making TMDK a unit to be reckoned with in that tournament?
Hey, if that happens, I'm not going to be mad at it whatsoever. That sounds fun and exciting, but I'm no dummy. I'm taking the smart money. Dangerous Tekkers all day.
So following that, we have Master Wato and Risuke Taguchi teaming up with Hikuleo and Hiroshi Tanahashi. They'll take on the House of Torture, Dick Togo, Evil, Sho, and Yujiro Takahashi.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of I don't know. This House of Torture at this point kind of reminds me of like Dungeon of Doom in 1995, 96 in WCW. So it's like, and then the fact that they got him against like Tanahashi and Hikuleo, they just seem to be doomed here. But you just never know with House of Torture. The real interesting thing going into this match is Hikuleo's recent defection from Bullet Club, and by proxy, House of Torture, which is a sub brand of Bullet Club. And this is his first time really teaming up with Hantai. And so we're going to see, well, he did recently in England as well, but we haven't seen those shows yet. They're kind of like the Bret Hart Tom McGee match, sort of lost, sort of like Ric Flair versus Bob Backlund in the Omni in '82. Like we just don't know if we're ever going to see this shit or not. But it is going to be interesting to see how Hikuleo interacts with the Hantai crew, and I think it's no mistake that they've got him teamed up with Tanahashi. They did the same thing with God when they first turned babyface and teamed him up with de facto Hantai leader Tanahashi to sort of give the nod and seal of approval. So I'm going to go with the baby faces going over here, and most likely, in my opinion, Hikuleo giving the giant choke slam to like Dick Togo probably, or Yujiro.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially we're going to talk about some other match announcements later. It seems like there are big plans in line for Hikuleo, so yeah, I definitely see him getting a big win to build some momentum leading into what he has going on.
I didn't even take that into consideration, but once you mention that, that solidifies it in my mind.
Yeah. So after that, we have Bishamon, Hiroki Goto, and Yoshihashi taking on the United Empire team of Great Okan and Jeff Cobb. Okan and Cobb coming off a victory over Fale and Chase at the conclusion of Burning Spirit in Kobe. And now they're facing off against another former tag team champs in Bishamon.
Yeah, so like in the early 2000s, there was a light heavyweight fighter by the name of what was his name here? Zolt Erde. And Zolt Erde was the quote unquote lineal light heavyweight champion. Like, if you follow the lineal history of the light heavyweight title, basically what happened is the right guy had beat someone at a certain time and then taken the title to Europe and just stopped defending against like credible challengers. And eventually, like from 04 to 09, Zolt Erde was the champion, and he only defended against no-namers in his own country. But everyone had to kind of acknowledge he's the real champion. And at the same time, Roy Jones Jr. has unified the division and is fighting all the best fighters at light heavyweight and destroying them, and is clearly, like, in the mind and eyes of real fans, he's the real champion. Because what's more important, being the best guy who beats the best and who is active, or the guy who just happens to get by in a technicality? It's not a perfect comparison, but that's kind of what we're seeing right now in New Japan Pro Wrestling as it pertains to the IWGP tag team titles. You got FTR, who are the champions. Yeah, they won it. They defended it once in what is most likely an incredible match by all accounts, but we haven't seen it. And prior to that, they haven't defended the titles. And more importantly, they haven't been to Japan. And all along at the same time, you got Bishamon and you got United Empire, who are active and having matches and rising up in the ranks. And the IWGP committee definitely takes notice of this.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about recently how, like, the United Empire are probably, like, number 1 ranked contenders. Well, Bishamon are probably number 2 right now. And we're getting, like, the playoff between the top 2 teams. And for my money, whoever wins this, they're the real IWGP tag team champions from this day forward. FTR, they're just some guys that, like, are complaining after their matches about how they're not getting booked on TV. You know, for as much as you love Bret Hart, that's not something I can imagine Bret Hart doing. Or complaining on Twitter about how people are going to underrate their match. I can't imagine Brody or Hanson or the Legion of Doom doing the same thing as that, but whatever. Have at it. You know, I'm sure the Brainbusters were real concerned about Dave Meltzer's star ratings or the opinions of fans, and definitely would be tweeting that shit. But yeah, man. I mean,
cosplay champions.
Yeah, cosplay champions. You know, belt marks at this point. And I don't care. You guys might like them, and I think they're. You know what's funny? I think they're great wrestlers, but I think they're marks, and I think they're also the moles that have been facilitating a lot of the shit that's going on in AEW. So, like, I don't know. I kind of don't want them to come to New Japan at this point. Like, with everything that's going on over there, I'm like, just stay over there, dude. Like, we don't need you guys. But this is for the real title. In my opinion, Bishamon versus United Empire, this is going to determine the top team in New Japan. And whoever wins this match is going to probably go into Tag League as, like, the de facto guys. And then FTR is going to show up and lay down for one of these teams in January.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm thinking Cobb and Great O'Khan are probably gonna get the wins here, keep them going strong, kind of make them, like you're saying, this uncrowned tag champs. You know, they haven't been pinned. They lost the titles in 3-way situations both times. So in a way, they kind of are the uncrowned champions, and this match will solidify it, I think, and they will go into World Tag League strong, maybe even win Tag League, and then you go to the Dome with FTR versus Cobb and O'Khan.
They're my pick for World Tag League right now, and they are one of the strongest tag teams New Japan's had in years. I wouldn't be surprised if the finals this year are Dangerous Tekkers against United Empire, and yeah. I think that's what we're leading to, and I think these are the guys right now. And I mean, considering how accomplished both of them are in the singles ranks, they're kind of like an all-star tag team, sort of, and so are, you know, Dangerous Tekkers to some degree as well. So, yeah. I'm looking forward to this, though, too, because Bishamon, they're no slouches. They're an incredible tag team, and this match should be really good. I think people, you know, are maybe sleeping on it a little bit, but, you know, look out. This is probably going to be one of the better matches of the night.
Yeah. So following that, we'll have the LIJ team of Bushi, Hiromu, Sanada, and Naito taking on the United Empire team of Aaron Hanare, Francisco Akira, TJP and Will Ospreay. And this is following up on the angle that happened at Burning Spirit in Kobe. And, spoiler alert. I'm sorry if you don't want to be spoiled from Royal Quest, but the news keeps going, and we got to talk about it.
The world of New Japan Pro Wrestling never stops.
Yeah, so if you don't want spoilers, you try and skip ahead. But at Royal Quest, Tetsuya Naito did defeat Zack Sabre Jr. in the main event of Night 2 to earn a IWGP US title match. So this match we'll be focusing on previewing Ospreay and Naito. Then also you got Bushi and Hiromu there with the current IWGP Junior Tag Champs in Akira and TJP. So potentially setting up a junior tag team title match, or maybe just hyping up the Junior Tag League.
Yeah. One last comparison I want to throw out there for Bishamon and United Empire. FTR and United Empire. FTR, Michael Spinks. United Empire, Mike Tyson. Okay? That there's not very many people are going to laugh at that, but it's relevant. As far as this match goes, I totally agree with you. We're on the horizon for a showdown between Naito and Ospreay for the U.S. title, and they had an incredible match during G1 in the semifinal. So that's a match I'm really looking forward to seeing once again, and it's going to be awesome. And then we had hypothesized just recently, just the other week, like what's going to happen if TJP and Akira retain, and we were like, well, maybe Hiromu and Bushi, and I think we're right on the money because that seems to be the case. Maybe they don't have a match between now and Super Junior Tag League, but there is the historic crossover show, and there's still the autumn, whatever they're calling it. What is it?
Battle Autumn.
Battle Autumn show. So I feel like there's at least 2 big shows still remaining. And who knows, maybe they can even do that match in America. There's a couple big, America shows too. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do this match just prior to Super Tag League.
Yeah, I'd also love to see them do like some singles to preview, like do Akira versus Hiromu, do Bushi versus TJP. I know we saw some of that in the Super Juniors, but I think it'd be fun to kind of run some of those.
They're definitely
going to
do that on a Cork and Hall. That's like their MO.
Yeah.
As far as like who I think is going to win here, that's a tough one. I mean, I hate to say this, but Bushi's probably going to lose, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's the clear pin eater out of all the people here, so I can see Bushi getting hit with Hanare's what's he call it, the Rampage or Streets of Rage.
There's also Aaron Hanare, and I could see Sonata, putting him in a TKO or Moonsault picking up the win.
That's true, but I still feel like Bushi's a little bit lower on the totem pole than Hanare at this point.
Yeah, this one I'm gonna abstain from predicting because I don't think it really matters. It's more about pushing the narratives of the several different feuds that are going on.
Yeah.
And you're going to Unite Empire.
Yeah. So after that, we have a non-title match with the IWGP Junior Champion Taiji Ishimori, the Bone Soldier, taking on Kushida.
Yeah, so I mean, Kushida's been out due to health issues for the past few shows, and now we're getting the singles match between these two guys, but it's non-title, and feels like at this point they're probably pushing this match all the way to January 4th in the Tokyo Dome. But
or maybe the Battle Autumn show in Osaka.
That's possible too. But in the recent couple of years, they've been building the title match for January 4th off of the Best of Super Juniors in the latter part of the year. Now that we've reverted back to May, it's kind of precarious as to how they're going to get to that January 4th title shot. And so I just have this weird feeling that they might be pushing this match off until January 4th and maybe putting it on the back burner for the Super Junior Tag League. But in either case, it's a non-title match, and my feeling is Kushida needs to win because the story is that he's not deserving of a title shot, and how can he get a title shot if he loses? You know what I mean? That would be a pretty big setback. So
Yeah,
I think he needs the win, and that's probably where they're going.
yeah. If he loses, I don't know what you do with Kushida. Where do you go from there if he loses this match? Like, I feel like he's already kind of had a lackluster return just because it happened right before G1, and then he was, pretty much off TV, off the tours. He was on strong a little bit, but he wasn't really highlighted. And then he's back, but then he's been sick, and there just hasn't been a ton of focus on him. So I really feel like he needs to win this match, and they need to run this title match.
And did you have a theory about them doing Leo Rush soon?
Yeah, so after Ishimori defeated Alan Angels last week on Strong, post-match he cut a promo and essentially called out Leo Rush, which we'll talk about in the news. Leo Rush is now officially cleared. So it seems like, I don't know why he would cut that promo, especially on Strong, which seems to be a little bit more controlled environment, why he would cut that if they weren't planning on doing something like that.
Maybe he beats Kushida, puts him to the back of the line, and they bring out Leo Rush, and Kushida kind of has to reinvent himself or do something. I don't know. Yeah. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's a possibility. Or, I mean, you could have Kushida win, but then Rush comes out still, and then you could do a multi-man.
Three-way?
Yeah. You know, at the Dome, they like doing multi-man.
They like to do those. That's
junior
true.
titles match, so you could set up some kind of three-way or four-way match at the Dome.
I gotta tell you right now, I'm not high on Ishimori versus Kushida whatsoever, and I'm also not that high on Leo Rush in New Japan in general. But if I had to have a match between those guys, a three-way, and I'm not usually a big advocate of three-ways, but a three-way in that situation is probably the most appealing situation I can think of.
Yeah. So yeah, we're both going Kushida here.
Yeah, I think it needs to be.
Yeah. So after that, we'll have the provisional KOPW championship match, the Who's Your Daddy match, with the champion, the Dragon, Shingo Takagi, defending against the headbanger, El Phantasmo.
Hey, pretty cool thing. They're third from the top. I can't remember too many KOPW matches that have been highlighted this high, so that's cool. Plus, it's just a standard match with high stakes at the end of it, sort of like a kiss my foot match or something like that, or kiss my ass match from the Attitude Era.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's who's your daddy? So the loser has to declare the other person their daddy. It's got to be Shingo. He's a former world champion. I cannot imagine a former world champion telling, heel ELP that he's his daddy. Like that would suck. But from a quasi comedic character who's also coming up from the junior ranks in ELP, I could totally see him taking the loss and making that proclamation and then being kind of Teflon and being fine coming out of it one way or the other. It doesn't really damage him one way or the other because he doesn't take himself that seriously, and the match itself should be pretty great. So I'm going with Shingo.
Yeah, going with Shingo also. I mean, they spent the whole Burning Spirit tour pushing ELP and having him beat Shingo left and right. Shingo only got some comeuppance at the very end of the tour. It's pretty much been all ELP. So yeah, I'm going to go with Shingo getting the win here, making ELP say that Shingo's his daddy, and then maybe we can move on upward for Shingo for something else. Then following that semi-main event of the evening, the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada, will take on the top dog, Jonah.
Yeah, so obviously this is the rematch from the infamous and famous match that they had in the G1 where Jonah was able to defeat Okada in one of the most thrilling and shocking upsets in modern times in New Japan. And Jonah has kind of owned Okada all throughout the tour, and obviously Okada is the G1 winner. He's going to be challenging for the title on January 4th, and regardless of the fact that there's not a January 4th title opportunity on the line, there's no briefcase being defended. Okada needs to get the win back regardless, because how good is that going to look for a guy that's been defeated 2 times back to back by a monster like Jonah, and then he goes in and gets a title shot against Jay White or Tama Tonga or whoever's the champion by that point. So my feeling is they've been building up Jonah as a monster so Okada can slay him, and the future of Jonah and this company following this is very much in question. So even if hypothetically he did leave, which he may or may not, we don't know, Okada's got to get that win back. Like, if I'm the booker, I am not letting Jonah, like, let's just think about worst case scenario. He beats Okada back to back and then jumps to, Paul Levesque. Like, hell no. Like, so Okada's got to get the win here. And the first match was really great. I do question whether they can match that same sort of match quality. It may or may not be doable, but it should be exciting either way. And Okada's got a pretty, insurmountable monster in front of him he needs to slay.
Yeah, kind of an Enoki-esque kind of match here with the top star taking on a foreign monster. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I think Okada definitely needs to get the win here, especially since there's only one Tokyo Dome. There's no need to set up another title challenger right now. So I think Enoki gets Okada gets the big win here, and beats Jonah, gets the win back in a great match. And who knows, maybe we'll see somebody else come out to try and quote unquote challenge Okada, and that will lead to Okada's opponent for Battle Autumn in November. So following that, we will have the main event of the evening for the IWGP World Heavyweight title. The champion, Switchblade Jay White, defending the title against the good bad guy, Tama Tonga.
Here's the thing. I'm a big fan of Tama Tonga. I'm a fan of this story that's been progressing all year long and kind of crescendoing here. But I just really I don't have a struggle potentially seeing Tama Tonga as a future champion, although I don't think it's, in my opinion, the most likely thing that could happen. But it's not impossible. And given the right timing and seasoning, it might even be impactful and important if it were to happen. I just don't think the timing is now, especially with it being October and January 4th is a few months away. And I don't feel like they've done enough. I feel like they've done a great job with Tama, and I think Tama's done a great job. And I'm a big fan of this whole storyline, but they haven't done enough to get him to that level to where he could headline a Tokyo Dome. And for that reason alone, there's no way I could see Jay White dropping the title to him. That being said, it would be really shocking and maybe even pretty exciting if they did decide to. I mean, here's a scenario. What if they kind of treat Tama Tonga like a very short-term transitional champion? What if he wins the belt and then loses it back to Jay White in autumn, in November, or to someone else in November? That is not outside of the realm of possibility. But putting that aside, I think the most likely scenario here, we see a situation where Jay White picks up the win and kind of goes on to his potential date with Okada.
Yeah, I mean, there is, I think, money in another Tokyo Dome Jay White Okada match. Okada still needs to get his win back from the last time they wrestled in the Tokyo Dome, where Jay White pretty much embarrassed Okada, beating him in quick fashion. Plus, Jay White also beat Okada this year at Dominion. So Okada definitely owes Jay White one. And so I think that's a match they're going to build for the Tokyo Dome this coming Dome season. So yeah, I think it's just the wrong time and place for Tama Tonga. Had this been some different time of the year, maybe post Wrestle Kingdom or pre Dominion, maybe you could have done a Tama Tonga title run. But I don't think right now is the right timing. I think there are ways you can make him look strong in defeat, which I think they'll probably go with here. and then you can, I would say, give Tama a hot singles match at the Dome and get him ready for post-Dome season for something big.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement. We had a question here.
Yeah, from the Dark Soldier says, do you feel Tama Tonga has had the best angles of the year? Not only have they been entertaining and gotten a big crowd reaction, but they even have an emotional core to them, something I always appreciate in my wrestling.
I would say for the most part, yeah, I agree with that. As far as New Japan goes, I can't think of too many other individuals that have had meaningful moments that stand out other than Tama Tonga in that regard. Maybe Tom Lawler or Fred Rosser in North America, but I don't know if that matters as much. That's about it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely Tama Tonga. You know, when we look at our angle of the year category, I mean, when I think about angles, I mean, all the ones that are coming up or so far are just, yeah, stuff revolving around Tama Tonga and this whole Bullet Club storyline. And they just had the angle last weekend with Hikuleo, you know, siding with him, which was a hot angle. And so, yeah, he's been a part of a lot of the hot angles this year, and they've done a great job using these angles to elevate him to the fact that he's now main eventing Sumo Hall against another foreigner for a title. It's a pretty big deal.
So that is going to do it for our review. Some news that came out earlier today: a pair of title matches have been made official for NJPW Battle Autumn in Osaka. So they've announced that the United States title will be defended between Naito and Osaka Saturday, November 5th. And also, they've set a never openweight title defense between Carl Anderson defending his title against Hikuleo. So that is also upcoming. Let's move on real briefly to NJPW Strong Fighting Spirit Unleashed Night 4. This past week, we had 3 matches as Kevin Knight and the DKC. They defeated Stray Dog Army, Barrett Brown, and Bateman, 8 minutes and 16 seconds. Second match of the night, Aaron Solo defeated Shea Cabrera, 8 minutes and 31 seconds. And then the main event was the Strong Openweight title as Fred Rosser, the champion, he defended and defeated TJP, 17 minutes, 20 seconds. Post-match, he was attacked by Chris Dickinson, and this did air this week on Strong, which a lot of people weren't expecting when they attended the show and weren't sure if it was going to air one way or the other.
Yeah. And we kind of covered our feelings on that angle. But overall, I thought it was a really fun episode of Strong. The opening match, Kevin Knight and the DKC, we saw them pick up a big win on the last set of tapings. And, you know, for Young Lions, you know, they're just starting to pick up wins here. They beat an established Strong team in Barrett Brown and Bateman. And also, tag team wins mean more now that we have Strong openweight tag team champion. So it seems like Kevin Knight and DKC might build up enough wins to maybe get a title shot towards the end of the year.
Very possibly. Like the way that they're building him up seems like that might be the case.
Yeah. Then Aaron Solo and Che Cabrera, fun 8-minute match. A lot of heat behind Aaron Solo and QT Marshall in the factory. And Aaron Solo did cheat, hold the ropes behind the ref's back on the pinfall over Che Cabrera. So gets a win there. And then the main event, Rosser and TJP, I thought this was a great, strong title match. I think Rosser really needed a defense like this. You know, we talk about TJP all the time and how smooth he is and how good of a wrestler he is, but I feel like he really turned it up in this match with Rosser. And to me, he was wrestling like he was going to win the title. Like he was wrestling really hard. Just the holes and counters they were doing, and I feel like in a little bit he was kind of schooling Rosser on the wrestling, and also that was kind of part of the story as well. He was kind of using his speed to out wrestle Rosser, using his experience to kind of use some holes to kind of keep Rosser down, and Rosser had to fight back and show some fighting spirit and use his power and striking ability to get over on TJP and eventually getting him in that STF chicken wing combo to tap out TJP.
This was clearly the best match that Fred Rosser's had in his title defense run so far. As fun and interesting as the Freddie Ahai match was, this kind of surpassed that, and it's the best match he's had since the inaugural win against Tom Lawler. So I thought this did a lot of favors for him, but it also, I mean, TJP, this is probably the best he's looked in New Japan in general since his return a couple years ago.
Yeah, I think he's on fire right now with the stuff he's doing on Strong, plus him and Akira as a team. I think he's having a really good run right now.
I think that this is the best he's looked since the Cruiserweight Classic.
Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, they had the angle after the match. Dickinson attacks him from the crowd, goes in the ring, beats him up, hold up the Strong title, and it was really talked about on the next tour. It is going to be roster defending against Dickinson. So it seems like New Japan, they're going full steam ahead with airing this angle and airing the Rosser Dickinson match next month.
Well, that is going to do it for NJPW Strong. Next week, coming up on Saturday, October 8th, we have Strong Autumn Action Night 1. QT Marshall will be going one-on-one with Shota Umino, a match they've been building to for a while. The aforementioned Juice Robinson versus Ren Narita singles match. And then the main event is going to be Homicide teaming up with Wheeler Yuta to take on IWGP World Heavyweight title holder Jay White and never openweight title holder Carl Anderson of the Bullet Club.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty big episode of Strong here. Like you mentioned, the QT Marshall and Umino angle. They've been building to that. Narita, like I mentioned earlier, did cut a promo on Juice, and I'm trying to remember the line he said. He said I was gonna I think he said I'm gonna take you rock hard and make you soft. I forgot the exact translation, but he got a pretty good line on Juice. So that's a pretty big match. And then a big main event here: Homicide teaming up with Utah, take on Jay White and Machine Gun.
I mean, as of right now, since we haven't seen anything from the Royal Quest tour, Fred Rosser versus TJP is the match of the month for October.
Yeah, because who knows when that will air? I mean, if it doesn't air in October,
we're not rating it.
It could go to Rosser and TJP.
Let's jump into the news. So, John Moxley versus Juice Robinson was this past Wednesday on AEW Dynamite. Juice Robinson says that he is now a free agent and no longer representing New Japan Pro Wrestling. So who knows what that means? This is a guy that's worked us in the past. Fooled me once, shame on you. Fooled me twice, can't get fooled again. So we don't know what that means, whether he's truly under contract, whether he's truly aligned with New Japan and the Bullet Club or not. It's very murky.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because on Dynamite, he did come out as, rock hard Juice Robinson from the Bullet Club. New Japan Social did promote the match and said that Juice was representing New Japan and tweeted it out and was, saying, Juice is, from New Japan facing off against John Moxley. So,
at the same time, we've mentioned many times on the air how precarious his booking during the G1 truly was, considering the big push they gave him in Chicago, or during Capital Collision. So hard to say.
Yeah, and his wording is very weird because previously in the worked interview he did on Wrestling Observer Live, he said that he was no longer representing New Japan, which meant that, which led to the angle of him representing Bullet Club. But in this interview, he was very clear to say that he's a free agent and not mentioning Bullet Club.
Also, the fact that his wife / fiance / girlfriend, no one's really sure, but they're in a very public relationship, him and Toni Storm. She works in AEW and he is a stateside wrestler. At one point, I believe he did move to Japan, but didn't, then the pandemic happened. That didn't seem to pan out. So who knows? Maybe he does want to go work for AEW. The other thing too is he doesn't have to be in New Japan to be Bullet Club. We've seen this in the past. I mean, just look at Chris Bay and the Gambit. What's his name?
Oh,
Ace Austin.
Ace Austin, yeah.
And there have been famous members of the Bullet Club who didn't primarily work in Japan. So there's a partnership, New Japan and AEW. Who knows? Maybe he is going to AEW. It's hard to say.
Yeah. We'll see.
In other news, Jonah was out this weekend as NJPW Royal Quest 2 events occurred in London. They announced Saturday morning that Jonah was out due to travel issues stemming from Hurricane Ian. He was originally set to be featured in a tag match on day one, and then faced Tomohiro Ishii in a singles match on day two. New matches were announced as a result of his absence, and the match that was originally set, where he was supposed to team with Bad Dude Tito against Okada and Ishii, they had Zack Knight take Jonah's place. And on the second night, Ishii faced a mystery opponent in singles action. We know who the mystery opponent is. We're not going to spoil it, but it's one that you're not going to be disappointed by. So pretty cool stuff there. New Japan has also announced how the joint tag league tour will be distributed based on this. It's going to be most likely 10 teams in each league. So like probably a single block, or it's probably going to be a single block just based on the math. But it looks like there are 7 cheering shows that are set up as of now. For most nights, it's going to be junior league only, and then some nights it's going to be heavy league and then juniors in the opener. Other times it's going to be junior league and then heavies in the opener, and then some nights it's going to be both leagues. So it's kind of all over the place, but it's going to run from November 21st to December 14th. We're getting how many shows here? It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18 shows about. Yeah. But the finals on December 14th, we're going to have the finals for both leagues occurring on that evening. And based on the math, it looks like December 10th, the junior league will wrap up with heavies in the opener. And then on December 11th, the next day, it's all heavy league matches. So that's where they'll wrap up the block play. So December 10th, they're going to wrap up the juniors. December 11th, they're going to wrap up the heavyweights. And then on December 14th, that's going to be the finals for both leagues on that evening.
Yeah, so very interesting schedule here. Like we said, it looks like it's going to be 10 teams in each league, which, probably means a single block for each tournament, which not a huge fan of single blocks, but with 10 teams in the junior side, it makes me think, like, all right, who are they bringing in to fill those slots? Because obviously, you got United Empire with Akira and TJP, Bushi Hiromu, Despi Kanemaru. But then besides that, maybe Flying Tiger, I feel like they have to bring in other people.
And my correction, there's going to be 17 shows over the course of the month. So other news, Karen Peterson, she has, you guys know Karen, she's on the show all the time, good friend of ours. She wrote a historic crossover X column, NJPW and Stardom's Crossed Paths, as we approach the historic crossover show on November 20th in Ariake Coliseum. Karen Peterson is providing a fortnightly introduction to the world of Stardom and its factions, its history. In this debut column, it is a look at history of crossovers before the Ariake pay-per-view was announced. And that was on njpw1972.com and their social media. You can find that on Twitter, and very proud of her, and glad to see she's getting the utilization and recognition that she's deserving.
Yeah.
FTR was announced that they'll be wrestling on the Return of the Dragon show on November 27th, which is the return of Ricky the Dragon Steamboat to wrestling. He'll be tagging with FTR against Jay Lethal, Arn Anderson's son, and a mystery opponent. I'm guessing it's Ric Flair, but that means they're going to be out of World Tag League at that point. So for anyone that was expecting them to come over and mix it up with the best of the best, whoever that may be, it's not happening. So they're out. Leo Rush was also recently set to return to the ring for the first time in 9 months. He posted that in all capital letters he was cleared on Twitter on Thursday, and was later announced as the 5th entrant into the Rev Pro British J Cup in 2022. Also recently announced was Tom Lawler's fight against Minoru Suzuki in a Defy ring at Defy Kingdom Come Saturday, October 29th. Rev Pro Sunday, October 23rd, Minoru Suzuki will be wrestling Yota Tsuji, and Carl Fredericks was recently spotted at the WWE Performance Center. Last bit of news, we posted this on our Twitter, but it's available also on YouTube. There was a recent 50th anniversary show for All Japan Pro Wrestling, which had some New Japan representation. And on the show, they had a Lions and Dads 6-man tag team match where Nagata teamed up with, or maybe it was an 8-man tag team match, but Nagata teamed up with the 3 Young Lions from New Japan Pro Wrestling in the opener, and they took on 2 of the Young Lions from All Japan Pro Wrestling, along with Nomura and Kento Miyahara. Actually, this might not even be the opener. I don't know where it was on the card, but this match is getting rave reviews, and it is available. Like I mentioned, we tweeted it out. It's on the All Japan official Twitter as well as their YouTube account. And if you haven't seen that match, definitely check it out. One of the prospects, I don't have his name, but he was an individual that New Japan was gunning to sign to the dojo, and he has a lot of hype behind him. He recently worked with Minoru Suzuki, and then Nagata was one of the individuals negotiating, trying to get him into the LA dojo, and it didn't work out. And people are, pretty much like clamoring for him to be a big star in All Japan and raving about his performance here. So if you haven't seen that match, it's well worth your time to go and check out. And I know I will be checking out this week.
Nice. We just had some matches for the next Strong Tour dropped on the Twitter. Some interesting matches here. So Gabriel Kidd, making his strong return, will take on the Ace, Hiroshi Tanahashi. Minoru Suzuki will take on Freddie Ahai. Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels will take on our good friend Rocky Romero. And Keita will take on Peter Avalon. Also, Filthy Tom Lawler will take on Homicide. Rock Hard Juice Robinson will take on Jake Something. Blake Christian and Mascarada will take on Chris Bay and ELP. And Kenny King, making his strong debut, will take on Che Cabrera.
All right, nice. Well, let's kick into the questions, but I say we give them super concise, quick answers so that we can just get out of here.
All righty. So Hawaiian Punch BV says, if Gals and Yano wrestle in a singles match again, should it be canceled midway through the match in honor of Enoki?
Yes.
Yes. With it looking like FTR is unlikely to compete in World Tag League, was there really a good reason to crown them champs?
No.
Just for partnership's sake and to make the partner happy, I guess. Some Forbidden Door talk. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are the GHC tag champions Takashi Sugiura and Satoshi Kojima going to compete in World Tag League?
That's an interesting thought, and if they do that, I would love it, but I think it's highly unlikely. I'll go 2.
Yeah, I would go 2 as well. I don't think that's going to happen. More than likely, it'll probably be Kojima and Tenzan.
I'm a little nervous about all these dads working outside dates so much. I feel like they might be leaving.
Yeah. His last question, have you checked out AJPW's 50th anniversary show? There are matches in it with NJPW's old wrestlers. Yuji Nagata wrestled AJPW's hyped young boy Yuma Anazai in his debut. Anazai got Nagata and Minoru Suzuki in his first 2 matches and a fun 8-man tag match with Nagata and the Young Lions in his third. He's also competing in AJPW's Real World Tag League with Nagata. Will there ever be a Young Lion that will receive this type of hype or push right off the bat? After the match with Nagata, Nagata had a look that screamed, I found the next ace, and how do we steal him? Do you think it's dangerous for All Japan to be sticking him with Nagata?
I don't know. I don't know the inner workings of the politics, so it's hard to say. But yeah, this was the Yuma Anzai was the one I was trying to recall his name. So I haven't seen it. I'll check it out, and I'm looking forward to that. And I think them teaming in the Real World Tag League is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything from the 50th anniversary for All Japan yet, but I've been hearing good things, especially about Yuma. So looking forward to checking that out. And yeah, again, I mean, it's possible that Nagata could be trying to again poach him to New Japan, but it could be possible that Nagata's maybe thinking, I can go work All Japan, be on top over there, and then also kind of groom Yuma as well. So who knows?
Well, Nagata was trying to get him into the or into the Noge dojo pretty hard.
Yeah.
Initially.
Next, Les Commission 7252. Would you guys say that IWGP World Heavyweight Championship match is a match to see who can overuse their finisher the most?
No, because both of their finishers are super protected and would finish the match. So it's going to be the match to see who can attempt to use their finisher more times than the other.
Right. You'll see lots of counters of finishers, but I think very rarely do you see finishers totally spammed in title matches like that. Also asks, who was the best counter to a finisher?
Jay White. Absolutely, Jay White has the best counter to finish. I mean, in New Japan, unless you're counting like Randy Orton, but yeah, probably Jay White with the sling blade, switchblade, whatever it's called.
The Blade Runner.
Blade Runner.
Yeah, he's shown in the last few years how easy it is to kind of reverse anybody's finisher into that, and he always does it so slick. So yeah, definitely Switchblade. His last question, he says Jon Moxley was set to take a vacation after All Out, but due to the media scrum incident with CM Punk in the Elite, his vacation was dialed back. If he loses the AEW World Heavyweight Championship to either Hangman, Adam Page, or MJF, do you think Tony Khan will grant him his vacation for the remainder of the year? And as a reward for carrying AEW this year, he will give him a chance to compete at Wrestle Kingdom 17.
I mean, I don't really know the answer to that, so I hate to speculate on it. I mean, I kind of thought we might see Moxley at Wrestle Kingdom either way, but with it being a Wednesday, it seems unlikely at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Mox, I think, is crazy enough to try to make both shows, to travel, do Wrestle Kingdom, and then, travel back in time with the flight to make it to, I think they're in Seattle for Dynamite, and make it back to be a part of that show. So moving on to the Dark Soldier says, do you feel Tama Tonga has had the best angles of the year? Actually,
you already answered that.
Where's that one? His next question says, by the time most people hear this episode, it will be Wednesday, aka National Scissoring Day. Happy National Scissoring Day, guys, because everybody loves the Acclaim, Scissor Me, Daddy Donovan, and Boy.
Young Boy. Cool. Great question.
He also says, 2 weeks ago, you guys talked about who would team with Tanahashi in this year's World Tag League. I thought about Yano because they teamed up last time. And with Yano helping Tanahashi in this Never title match, it seems to be going in that direction. What do you think? I actually like Tanahashi and Yano as a tag team. Wouldn't mind even them being champions. What say you?
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought they were a fun tag team. I like their gimmick. I forget what manga they were paying tribute to, but I like the shirt they released last year. I like the slick back pompadour hair and the matching jackets. Pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tanahashi and Yano be a fine addition. Fine, bring back for Tag League this year. Not really calling for them to be tag champions, but they'll be fun to watch. And his last question, it says, Jeff Cobb during United Empire celebration of Burning Spirit said to the crowd and us all to buy United Empire shirts. Should we do as he says?
If you want.
We're not going to tell you what to do with your money.
Except for you can leave us a donation and support this show, giving you some of the best content out there on the internet. Absolutely. That's where I would say, instead of buying the United Empire shirt, why don't you, drop us a dime and, give us some support to help us fund this show. Every dollar that you put into the show goes back into the show and helps us to keep the lights on, helps us to, bring on great guests, helps us to up our production quality and value. And, very soon we're thinking about potentially going, video. And the more money you guys give us, the more likely that is to be done. So if you want to see our lovely faces and, have us do it right, studio style, drop us a couple dollars. Don't put your money on the United Empire. Put it on Kiss.
Yeah, nice pitch there. Even though I do really like those new Empire shirts with the silver writing, with that silver design that they have going.
I haven't seen them. I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, they've been wearing them all tour.
I don't pay attention to what they wear on the entrance.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for questions. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, we are going to punt our recommended match of the week and excursion match.
Listen, I want to change my match. I gave you the 87 10-man tag elimination match. I messed it up. I wanted to do the 88 elimination match, which I think is superior. I'll send you the details, but the 87 one's very good, but I was mistaken. It's the 88 match, and I'll find the link. I'll send it to you. I just don't want anyone to be like, you said 87. He reviewed the 88. The 88 match is the Raw match. That's the one I love. I'm sending you that match.
Gotcha. And then my excursion pick was Machine Guns versus Aussie Open from Impact 2 weeks ago.
All right.
that will be that. And that's going to wrap things up for us here this week. Next week, I will not be here. I will be on my actual honeymoon, and James Boyd from One Nation Radio will be coming in on the show to fill in for me, do the show with Josh to review Declaration of Power. So if you enjoyed today's show, please consider making a donation by visiting socialsuplex.com/donate and click on the donate button under the Keeping It Strong Style logo. Make sure to connect with us on social media. The show is at KI Strong Style. You can follow the network at Social Suplex, and you can follow me at Jeremy L. Donovan on Facebook. We are facebook.com/Social Suplex, on Instagram at Social Suplex, on Reddit I'm the Pro Black Guy. Josh is Keeping It Strong Style. You can email me, Jeremy at socialsuplex.com. Make sure you check out all the other shows here on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. One Nation Radio, hosted by Rich Latta and James Boyd. The Grave Consequences, hosted by Caleb and Maserati. All Things Elite, hosted by Floyd Johnson Jr. and Austin Summerwitz. The AEW Match Guide Podcast, hosted by Sir Sam. And the Great Match Generator, hosted by Danny Kukler. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. And we'll catch you next week on Keeping It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts.
Ichi, ni, san, da. Long live Enoki. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Keepin' It Strong Style. We'll see you next time.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
Urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
it's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.